Hello, and welcome to the Nauticast podcast, the one true chapter by chapter podcast going through a Song of Ice and Fire one chapter a week. I'm one of your hosts, Jeff, better known as Brenda Fish.
And I'm your other host, Emmett, better known as Poor Quentin.
And welcome to the 150th episode of the Nauticast titled The Tree of Life, an analysis of A Clash of Kings Bran VII, in which Bran Stark leaves his home, his childhood, and the book behind as we, on the Nauticast podcast, reach the end of A Clash of Kings.
You know, that worked out. Our 100th episode was a Bran chapter, and our 150th episode is a Bran chapter. That's nice round numbers. We'll have to, redo the entire order of A Storm of Swords to make sure we're always landing on Bran chapters for round numbers from now on. This is my commandment.
Agreed. I'm with you 100%. Just brilliant symmetry on our part, right?
Exactly.
We happened to plan out. We were doing 4 Davos episodes and 18 Catelyn episodes for Catelyn.
It was all for this.
All part of the plan, right?
Just like George, we planned it out all ahead of time. Aren't we smart?
Mm-hmm.
Anywho, we're very excited to have a guest on for this final chapter in the Clash of Kings. I guess we've had on before for a Bran chapter, no less, way back in book 1. Please welcome back to the Nauticast, Manu. Thank you so much for coming back on the Nauticast.
Hey, thank you guys. I'm Manu, better known as Manuclear Bomb, and I'm greatly humbled to be back joining you fine gentlemen once again. You may remember me from such episodes as Bran 4 from A Game of Thrones, or my little Metal Gear Solid chat with Emmett a couple months back. And you can get more of that amazing Metal Gear Solid coverage over at my podcast, Sans Frontieres. Yes, it's French. Yes, we're fancy.
Podcast. Okay, so it's Sans Frontieres, because I said Frontiers the last time as a good old American. So that was my pride and my shame.
That little cowboy twang on it. That works too.
It was really bad SEO because Metal Gear nor Solid appear anywhere in our podcast title. So we're really hoping people pick up it's based off Militari Sans Frontieres, which is a organization that Big Boss has in the game Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, yada, yada, yada. But yeah, we tried to go with a clever title, but not big on the SEO there.
I think it's great. So I've never played the games, but I am listening to the podcast, and I encourage all of you folks to listen to Manu's podcast. It is excellent and well worth your time, if not anything, because Manu is a super person, and we really appreciate him coming back to join us for our final episode on the Clash of Kings and our final Bran episode for Clash of Kings, both at the same time. So before we proceed onward into the episode proper, we wanted to talk a little bit about what happens next on the Nauticast podcast. Again, thank you all so much that you've been listening to us for over 3 years now. It's kind of amazing to us that we started in January 2018, and you all are still listening to us here in April 2021. That's very it means a lot to me. So thank you, and it means a lot to both of us. It's not just me; it's also to Emmett as well. Now, I am excited to get into A Storm of Swords, as most of you probably are. But unfortunately, for me, I am going to have to take a leave of absence from the podcast for work-related reasons for a few months. So that I'm not leaving the podcast, I am going to be back, but I do have to take a leave of absence for work for a few months. My plan is to be back and podcasting with you all by August 2021, but that means we're not going to immediately jump into A Storm of Swords in a few weeks. Very sad. That said, for all of our $5 Poor Fellow and Above patrons, we'll have one final episode coming your way, which is our wrap-up episode in which we review A Clash of Kings in totality and talk about what we're looking forward to in A Storm of Swords. I will definitely be sad and will miss very many of you, most of you, all of you, whatever. For those who watch our weekly live streams, I don't know what the future holds for them yet. I do hope we can continue doing live streams when I'm able to resume podcasting, but I can't make any promises. So, to sum up, we'll be taking a few months off of our regular chapter-by-chapter episodes, and our plan is to resume in August 2021, and we can maybe do live streams then. But that doesn't mean that the podcast is ceasing production for the next few months. We are going to live on.
Yep, you still got me to deal with, unfortunately, folks. I'm so sorry for all of you. While Jeff is away, I'm still going to be doing weekly episodes with rotating guest hosts. Every week I'm going to have someone else on to talk about different topics. Sometimes we're going to be talking about something in A Song of Ice and Fire, sometimes not. I'm also going to be doing a bunch of kind of text posts and audio posts on my own whenever I'm feeling that day and that week, stuff I'm listening to or watching or thinking about or would just like to discuss with everyone. So I'm going to be doing that for patrons. Maybe some of them released for the general public. If it's popular, we'll see. But overall, I just want to agree with what Jeff said, that we're so gratified and happy that we've had so many people listening and supporting and talking about our podcast over the last few years, and that we are so excited to keep that going with the Storm of Swords when Jeff returns. And I just want to take the opportunity, not that I ever do this, to express my love for Jeff and just my happiness that I've got to do this with him over the last few years. It's such a delight to share mental and emotional space with you, sir, and to collaborate with you and work on this every week. So I'm going to miss that, but I'm very excited to have you back with it when you are. And I'm just, we look forward to welcoming you back. All of us, I know that. So everyone keep Jeff in their thoughts, for a little bit, I guess, for a couple of days. He's Jeff. I mean, don't
as little as
don't like change any plans or anything.
No.
But,
don't feel any emotions. Just be like, okay, yeah, he's gone. It's fine. We're gonna be fine. We'll be back in August in no time. So it's I appreciate
you won't have time to miss him.
Right, exactly. You're barely gonna be gone before you're like, whatever. So I can go ahead, Manu.
If I could speak for the community, we love you, Jeff, and we miss you, and we wish you the best and a happy, swift return. So we appreciate all you do, and we love you. We love you both. And if I can be the community surrogate for a moment, just want to express that to you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And, we will be back. So it's not going to be a forever thing. It's just going to be for a few months thing. So if you're listening to this episode, in July or August 2021, you're like, what are they talking about? It's not even going to matter to you at that point. But for those of you who are listening to us on a weekly by weekly basis, we will be back in a few months, and I will miss you all. So thank you. As always, this episode is brought to you by our not a small council, our Hand of the King Wolfman Zach, Grand Maester Tim Bob, troubleshooter of systems and designer of circuit boards, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard Mark N, Sir Keith J, Master of Whisperers, Lord Philip the Merciful, Master of Laws, Archmaester June, Healer of the Lesser Poxes, Ragged Michael, War of the North, Nelson Hammer, Prince of Dragonscone, Scarlet, the Other Red Woman, and Mistress of Whisperers, Lord Micah, the Quilled Lion, War of the West, Herald the Golden Tooth, Master of the Banefort, and the Kraken's Bane, Lord James, the gem that was promised, Lord Jake assisted to the Hand of the King, Lady Zine of Lyrium, Sir Jack, Lord of Sir Arthur Dayton, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, Sad Prophecy Boys Club, His Grace's High Inquisitor, Sir Frank B, Lawrence, Prince of Dorne, Kelly, Ward of the Eastern Bishops of Old Bay of Crabs, Stephen the Steadfast, Master of Hounds, the Blue Winter Rose, Knight of Highgarden, Lady Stephanie, Lord Carlos, Lord Andrew the Restless, the Priest of the Drowned God, Sir Sorsa Delica, lost my place, Lord Pension for Nostalgia, Queer Alex, Beyonce's favorite saint, Ambassador of Chromatica, Rainbow Commander of the Ladies and Gentle Thems, Oliver, the Waiter for T-Wow, A.A. Ron, Damp Hair, Prophet of the Forsaken, and High Priest of Euron Crow's Eye, Lieutenant Glenn, Lord of H-Town, Benares of House Golgarian, the first of her name, Princess Dragonstone, Mistress of Art, the Overworked, Queen of the Pencils, the Eraser in the First Draft, Queen of Monochrome, Deputy of the Great, Game of Thrones, Portions of the Realm, Lady Realist of the Seven Kingdoms, Blender Paints, Maker of Drawings, and the Michelangelo of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Lord Adam T, Lady Alexander of Tarth, Sir Christoph Logus, Bloody Scorpion of the Red Field, Defender of the Letter of Kin, and the Wolverine of House Gorgoyle. Lady Elizabeth, Mistress of Horse, Face, Lesbians, Sir Josh Snow, Bastard Bounty Hunter of the North, Surveyor, Chief of Parties in the Frozen Wastes, Lord Peter, the Dead Shipper Reborn, Preacher of the Poor Fellows, Marshal Harrison, Absent, Shipwrecked in the Jade Sea, Grave Rob Stark, the Cadaver King, and Horror of Harrenhal, Ola, proponent of establishing a feudal, pseudo-democratic system of great councils wherein every count votes, Sir Tim, the Knight who is guided by voices, Lord Nick, Thucydides, Lord of Plagues, Sir Jack, Lord of Sir Arthur Dayton, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, Sad Prophecy Boys Club, Part 2, Lady Anna, the Lovely Castellan, Pat Ironwood, the Blood Royal and Guardian of the Bone Way, Lord Charles Tyrell of Highgarden, Lord Paramount the Mander, Defender of the Marches, High Marshal of the Reach, War of the South, and the Heir of House Tyrell, Luke, Lord of Lone Leaf and the Pillar of Autumn, Joe Snow, King of the Metro North and Protector of the Tri-State, Squire Matt S, Future Matt S, the one who will bring balance to the kingdoms, B-Word, Queen Beyond the Wall, Lord Kyle, Lord Samos Eworth, Sir Max, Lord Commander of the Constitutional Guard, Lady Ivory Dane, aspiring noble author in the Seven Kingdoms, Lady of Starfall, Warness of the South, and the patron of free-wheeling bisexuals, Lady Jamisa, she who suggests that coconuts migrate, Lord Christoph of Arendelle, official ice master and deliverer, the valiant, pungent reindeer king, keeper of feisty pants, and prince consort to his ginger sweet love Queen Anna, and Lord Sir Septon Brothers. Thank you to all of our small council patrons.
Thank you, counselors, as always.
And our spoiler warning, FC7, every episode will potentially be talking about all published books. That is the 5 novels, 3 Dunking novellas, histories, interviews, the Winds of Winter sample chapters, as well as Game of Thrones, a TV show. Anything and everything.
Our question this week comes from the Black Pearl of Detroit, a Kingsguard patron, who asks, howdy, if anyone can answer, why does the fandom refer to Rhaegar's son / Young Grift as Aegon VI? As far as I can tell, members of royal families who are in line to lead don't get their regnal number until they've had their coronation. He's certainly not the sixth Aegon in existence, and he's not even the sixth Aegon to have been eligible to rule via primogeniture. So do we just refer to him as sixth as shorthand so everyone knows who we're talking about? I'll throw it over to our guest. What do you think about that, Manu?
I feel like I was ill-prepared last time I was on for a listener question, back when you guys did 2 or 3 per episode.
Oh gosh, I remember that.
That's true.
And I'm sorry that I don't have anything better today, because everyone I listen to pretty much just calls him Fagon, or more recently, Young Grift. I think specifically I picked it up from you guys, so thank you for that, I guess. I guess maybe to some extent, some people assume a crowning is forthcoming in the Winds of Winter. I think that kind of narratively makes sense for early on in Winds, especially if they take Storm's End and declare Aegon as the true heir to the Iron Throne. I think maybe some people consider that a done deal. I never like to do that with George, but I can see, like, it's after the first act of the Winds of Winter, I can see Aegon having been crowned officially in the eyes of gods and men, so to speak. So that's my best guess at it.
I'm with you. I think it's just shorthand to distinguish Aegon the Fifth from Aegon the Sixth, from Aegon the Fifth, from Aegon the Fourth and the Third and the Second and the First. So it's just shorthand typically, and I think the way like people use it, it's not actually used in the novels itself. He's referred to as Young Griff or Prince Aegon when we get to the Lost Lord, and he's referred to Prince Aegon in the Griffin Reborn, that second John Connington chapter. So it's I think it's just simply shorthand, but I think it's effective in communicating meaning, which is what you're supposed to do when you create a shorthand for something. I don't really have a lot more to add to that one, but I do think it's interesting that John, if its name actually is Aegon, and I do think it actually is Aegon, that he would potentially be the 6th or the 7th. I don't know if George was going for a 7th thing because 7 is a holy number in Westeros because of the faith of the 7 and the 7 gods and the 7 aspects of God, rather. I don't know, but I think Aegon the 6th is supposed to be just like kind of just a little bit short of Aegon the 7th being Jon Snow, being the one who's actually the one worth a goddamn at the end.
I agree. It does kind of set up Jon as the actual placeholder, so to speak. That Young Grift is more auditioning for. And the Golden Company does throw around like Aegon 6th of his name, and the first Aegon took Westeros without eunuchs. Why shouldn't the 6th Aegon do the same? And that does kind of elide all those other Aegons, but that is kind of a political statement on their part. They're trying to set up a narrative in which this was always obviously the rightful heir, and this kid was always alive. So yeah, I think it does. He's a character who is not popular in the first place, and also is kind of difficult to talk about for this reason. But I kind of like that George sets it up that way. That he's there's just no real to the kid, because that any name you want to use to talk about him is just not quite right. So because there's nothing there at all. So I like that as a concept, even though obviously, I think it's good to have John Connington there as kind of the dramatic center of that plot, because otherwise I think it would be a very kind of academic kind of exercise, that storyline, for reasons like this. But it is true. Like, there's been tons of Aegon, so I think that is just, we see is on that, so we don't have to be constantly asking each other, wait, you're talking about that kid with the blue hair,
right?
Dragons?
Yeah.
Now we can move on and have a conversation. We don't want to be doing that constantly. There's already enough freaking characters in this story,
and enough goddamn Aegons too,
and enough Aegons and Brandons. We got to clarify these things sometimes.
Exactly. Andrew Mumford in our chat did bring up a really interesting parallel, and he says that the 6 works because he's the 6th Blackfire Rebellion, the 6th house to enter the War of the Five Kings,
sure.
And his backstory is basically the plot of The Omen, which I have not seen, so I'll just assume is true. Is that true? I don't know.
The plot of The Omen, I guess, although he's not like scary like the Omen kid is, but like in terms of being, the seed dropped elsewhere, certainly. Jeez, I hope you don't start seeing like wolves and a bunch of like hanged nurses around Young Grift and Winds. That's going to be a twist. I would love. The Omen is one of those movies I watched when I was far too young. Like a guy gets beheaded in that movie, and I still see it when I blink.
Oh wow,
it's a wonderful, wonderful movie. I recommend everyone. Anywho. Thank you so much, Lady Black Pearl of Detroit, for the question. If you'd like to ask us questions, we answer here on the Notacast podcast. You're welcome to become a Sworn Sword or higher level patron over at patreon.com/Notacast ASOIAF, where you can get show notes, free merch, access to the Not a Slack at our 2 highest tiers, and bonus episodes like our upcoming episode in which we review A Clash of Kings, talk about how we feel about the book now that we've finished it, our first impressions versus our current impressions, theories that come from this book, our favorite and least favorite storylines, and what we are excited to cover when we start A Storm of Swords in a few months' time.
And I can't wait to that episode with you, sir. And while I'm sure all of you will be tap dancing your asses over to our Patreon to join up and listen to that episode, of course, we also have 37 other Patreon-only episodes covering A Song of Ice and Fire topics like the Battle of Ice, character analysis of Robert, Stannis, and Renly Baratheon, the Tour of Old Atlantis, why the Windswinter is taking so long to come out, our 5-part series on the Windswinter, the Forsaken, and if that wasn't enough, we also have movie analyses on films, cinema, like Kingdom of Heaven and Man of Steel. And if that wasn't enough, we're also 19 chapters deep in yet another chapter by chapter podcast covering George R.R. Martin's 1982 vampire novel Fever Dream. So please come over and check out our Patreon at patreon.com/Notacast, ASOIAF. We would love to have you. But enough about Patreon. When we last checked in with a Bran Stark point of view chapter, Theon Greyjoy had taken Winterfell. Do you all remember that episode we did with Stanford Fraser back in August 2020, nearly a year ago? There may have been a few plot events which happened since that time. Maybe. Let's find out how Bran Stark survived and plans to live on in this synopsis of A Clash of Kings, Bran 7. The ashes fell like a soft gray snow. He pattered over dry needles and brown leaves to the edge of the wood where the pines grew thin. Beyond the open fields, he could see the great piles of man rock stark against the swirling flames. The wind blew hot and rich with the smell of blood and burnt meat so strong he began to slaver. Summer smells things that drive him towards the castle, but there are other things that drive him away. Men, horses, and fire. The last smell was the most dangerous of them all. All the smoke and ash gets into Summer's eyes, and then he sees something interesting. In the sky, Summer saw a great winged snake whose roar was a river of flame. He bared his teeth, but then the snake was gone. Behind the cliffs, tall fires were eating up the stars. Wait a minute, did Summer just see a freaking dragon? More on this later. Fires burn through the night, and a crash emanates from the castle. Terrified dogs and horses bark and whinny, whine, scream, and howl, and among the people wailing, shouts, wild laughter, and screams. Summer listens to it all as Shaggy Dog growls. The fires eventually burn out and the noises die down, and the sun also rises. Summer and Shaggy move through the trees and cross fields drawn by the smells of blood and death, but there were no living men to be seen. There were only crows and wild dogs feasting on the slain. They come upon a dying horse, and Shaggy Dog rips out its throat. Summer goes in for a bite, but Shaggy Dog fights him. The wolves roll amidst the grass until Shaggy Dog relents, and Summer emerges dominant. He feeds and then lets Shaggy Dog get his share. The dark place was pulling at him by then. The house of whispers where all men were blind. He could feel its cold fingers on him. The stony smell of it was a whisper up his nose. He struggled against the pool. He did not like the darkness. He was wolf. He was hunter and stalker and slayer, and he belonged with his brothers and sisters in the deep woods, running free beneath the starry sky. Summer sat on his haunches, raised his head, and howled. "I will not go," he cried. "I am wolf. I will not go." Yet even so the darkness thickened until it covered his eyes and filled his nose and stopped his ears, so he could not see or smell or hear or run. And the gray cliffs were gone, and the dead horse was gone, and his brother was gone, and all was black and still and black and cold and black and dead and black. "Bran," a voice was whispering softly. "Bran, come back. Come back now, Bran. Bran." Bran closes his third eye and opens his two eyes, the quote-unquote blind two. They were in the dark where everyone was blind, but Hodor was holding him. Mira tells Bran that he was thrashing. What did he see? He saw Winterfell, and it was on fire. Everyone was dead. Mira strokes Bran's face and asks if he wants a drink. He does, so Mira gives him some water. Bran realizes he was hungry, but he ate a Summer. Bran asks how long he was out.
3 days, said Jojen. The boy had come up softfoot, or perhaps he had been there all along. In this blind, black world, Bran could not have said. We were afraid for you.
I was with Summer, Bran said.
Too long. You'll starve yourself. Mira dribbled a little water down your throat, and we smeared honey on your mouth, but it is not enough.
Bran says that he ate while he was in Summer, reiterating that point rather. He even had to fend off a tree cat that was going for an elk that he and Shaggy had eaten.
The wolf ate, Jojen said. Not you. Take care, Bran. Remember who you are.
He remembered who he was all too well. Bran the boy, Bran the broken, better Bran the beastling. Was it any wonder he would sooner dream his summer dreams, his wolf dreams? Here in the chill, damp darkness of the tomb, his third eye had finally opened. He could reach summer whenever he wanted, and once he had even touched ghosts and talked to Jon, though maybe he had only dreamed that. He could not understand why Jojen was always trying to pull him back now. Bran wonders where Osha is, and Osha replies that she's here with Bran in the dark. Bran thinks he can smell her, but all of them smell bad down here in the dark. Osha reports that she urinated on the foot of a dead Stark king last night, or this morning. It's hard to tell in the dark what time of day it was. All they did down the crypt since they arrived was sleep, eat, and talk in whispers, though Rickon and Hodor were hard to keep quiet. Bran reports to Osha that he saw Winterfell burning, and Osha says it was only a dream. No, Bran replies, it was a wolf dream. He smelled the fire and the blood of men, horses, and dogs. They need to go see what's up. But Osha says she's only got one set of skin. She'd prefer to keep that skin rather than have Theon whip it off her. But Mira says she'll go. She lights a torch, waking Rickon up. When the shadows moved, it looked for an instant as if the dead were rising as well. Lyanna and Brandon, Lord Rickard Stark, their father, Lord Edwyle, his father, Lord William and his brother Artos the Implacable, Lord Donner and Lord Baron and Lord Rodwell, One-Eyed Lord Jono, Lord Barth and Lord Brandon and Lord Cregan, who had fought the Dragon Knight. On their stone chairs, they sat with stone wolves at their feet. This was where they came when the warmth had seeped out of their bodies. This was the dark hall of the dead, where the living feared to tread. And in the mouth of the empty tomb that waited for Lord Eddard Stark, beneath his stately granite likeness, the 6 fugitives huddled round their little cache of bread and water and dried meat. Osha says they don't have a lot of food left. They need to go into the castle to steal some food, or else they'd be down to eating Hodor, which, okay. Osha wonders if it's day or night, and Bran says it's day, but it will look dark due to the smoke. When Osha questions him, Brandon briefly wargs Summer one last time and sees the castle with its pillars and drifting gray smoke and all of the bodies floating in the moat. He's certain it's day. Osha says she'll risk looking around, but she wants everyone to stay behind her. Rickon wants to know if they're going home to see Shaggy, and Bran reassures his brother that they are, but they have to be quiet. Mira straps Bran's wicker basket to Hodor's back and puts Bran into it. Bran feels sad and strange. He knows what's waiting for them, but he's still afraid. He then looks at his dad's crypt statue. It seemed to Bran that there was a sadness in Lord Eddard's eyes, as if he did not want them to go. We have to, Bran thought. It's time. Osha leads the way with her spear in one hand and the torch in the other. She straps a sword to her back, specifically Lord Rickard Stark's blade, while Bran takes his Uncle Brandon's sword. He wouldn't be able to use it, but the sword felt good in his hands. He thinks this was a game as their footsteps echo through the crypts. The shadows behind them swallowed his father as the shadows ahead retreated to unveil other statues. No mere lords these, but the old kings of the north. On their brows they wore stone crowns. Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt. Edwin, the spring king. Theon Stark, the hungry wolf. Brandon the burner and Brandon the shipwright. Excuse me. Jorah and Jonas, Brandon the Bad, Walton the Moon King, Edarion the Bridegroom, Iron, Benjen the Sweet, and Benjen the Bitter, King Edric Snowbeard. Their faces were stern and strong, and some of them had done terrible things, but they were Starks, every one. And Bran knew all their tales. He had never feared the crypts. They were part of his home and who he was. And he had always known that one day he would lie here too. But now he was not so certain. If I go up, will I ever come back down? Where will I go when I die? It's getting pretty fucking hard not to quote this whole chapter, but we got to press on. When they get to the stairs, Osha tells them to wait as she feels her way up the stairs. Hodor says, Hodor, nervously. Bran had hated hiding down here, but now he's scared to emerge into the light. There is safety in darkness, a feeling that their enemies could never find them. And the Stark Crypt Lords had made Bran feel brave. He knew they were there, even when he couldn't see them, and that makes him feel safe. They wait a long while as Rickon and Hodor grow nervous and anxious before Osha returns and reports that the door is blocked. She can't move it. Bran suggests Hodor move the door, and Osha says yes, he should hold the door. So Hodor goes to hold the door, and they all move up the narrow steps. When they reach the top, Osha tries to push the door one more time, but it doesn't move. So Hodor gets his shot. They move Bran out of the basket, and Bran commands Hodor to open the door by holding it. Is this joke getting old? Probably. The huge stable boy put both hands flat on the door, pushed and grunted. Hodor? He slammed a fist against the wood and did not so much as jump. Hodor! Use your back, urged Bran, and your legs. So Hodor presses his body against the door and shoves over and over again, shouting, Hodor, as the wood splinters. And then Bran hears a rumble and light floods into the crypt, blinding Bran momentarily. The door crashes open and Bran then hears the sound of shifting stone. Osha pokes her spear through as Hodor shoves the door all the way open. Holding it, right? Okay, I'm done. Mira and Jojen take Bran up the last few stairs. The sky was gray and the smoke was all around them. They find themselves in the shadow of the first keep as stones and shattered gargoyles are lying on the ground. Bran thinks they fell in the same place as them. He wonders how he survived his own fall. But then they see their first body under one of the stones with crows pecking at it. Bran doesn't know who that person had been. The first keep had not been used for many hundreds of years, but now it was more a shell than ever. The floors had burned inside it, and all the beams where the walls had fallen away, they could see right into the rooms, even into the privy. Yet behind, the broken tower still stood, no more burned than before. Jojen Reed was coughing from the smoke. Take me home, Rickon demanded. I want to be home. Hodor stomped in a circle. Hodor, he whimpered in a small voice. They stood huddled together with ruin and death all around them. Osha notes that they made enough noise to wake a dragon, but no one's around, just like Bran dreamed. But suddenly there's a noise, and Osha whirls around with a spear in hand. Thankfully, it turns out to be none other than Summer and Shaggy Dog as they make their way over to the boys to their delight. But Jojen's had enough of this place. He says they need to get going before other wolves come to feast on the dead. Osha says, sure, but they need to get food first, and they also need to check for survivors. Osha, the humanitarian, who knew? Mira will guard their backs with a frog shield as they pick their way through Winterfell. The party spends the whole morning looking through Winterfell, but they don't find anything but death and destruction. The great hall doors were burned, glass gardens were broken up, and the stables were all burned down. Bran wants to cry for his horse Dancer. They make their way over to the library tower and find the stone cracked, letting out hot water from the castle, and Maester Luwin's turret is gone. They find only fire beneath the great keep. All the while, Osha calls out to see if anyone is alive. They only find a dog eating a corpse with the rest of the hunting hounds killed in the kennels. Luwin's ravens eat the dead, and Bran sees that Poxy Tim is among the slain. Another corpse lays burnt, raising two fists into the air in a final act of defiance. If the gods are good, Osha said in a low, angry voice, the others will take them that did this work. It was Theon, Bran said blackly. But Osha points out that it wasn't actually Theon. She points out that Black Lauren is dead, and so is Theon's horse. She kicks the corpse over and points out a badge of a little man, all in red. Bran realizes that it's the Bolton sigil, but then Summer howls and runs away. The gods would. Mira Reed ran after the direwolf, her shield and frog spear in hand. The rest of them trailed after, threading their way through smoke and fallen stones. The air was sweeter under the trees. A few pines along the edge of the wood had been scorched, but deeper in the damp soil and green wood had defeated the flames. There. Sorry, you would do this line. Sorry, I apologize. Missed it.
Oh, sorry. 1 sec. There is a power in living wood, said Jojen Reed, almost as if he knew what Bran was thinking. A power strong as fire.
They make their way over to the black pool and find none other than Maester Luwin on his belly in front of the heart tree with a blood trail behind him. Bran thinks he's dead, but then Mira touches Luwin's neck, and Maester Luwin lives on, at least for the moment. They get Maester Luwin onto his back, and Bran takes note of his gray eyes, gray hair, and his formerly gray robes now darkened by blood. Bran, he said softly when he saw him sitting tall on Hodor's plaque. And Rickon, too. He smiled. The gods are good. I knew. Knew? Said Bran uncertainly. The legs. I could tell. The clothes fit, but the muscles in his legs. Poor lad. He coughed, and blood came out from inside of him. You vanished in the woods. How, though? Well, they only went to the edge of the woods, and then they doubled back and sent the wolves on while they hid in Ned Stark's tomb. Luwin chuckles at them hiding in the crypts, but the chuckle causes Luwin an immense amount of pain. Tears filled Bran's eyes. When a man was hurt, you took him to the maester. But what could you do when your maester was hurt? Osha says they need to make a litter to carry him, but Luwin tells them not to worry themselves. He's dying. You can't, said Rickon angrily. You know you can. Beside him, Shaggy Dog bared his teeth and growled. The maester smiled. Hush now, child. I'm much older than you. I could die as I please. Bran orders Hodor down. Excuse me. Bran orders Hodor down so that Bran can talk with Luwin, and Luwin tells Osha to split Bran and Rickon up. They're Robb's heirs. Osha agrees, but she doesn't know where to take them. Maybe to the Kerwins? Maester Luwin shook his head, though it was plain to see what the effort cost him. Kerwin's boys dead. Sir Roderick, Leopold Tallheart, Ladies Hornwood, all slain. Deepwood fallen, Moat Caelan, soon Torrhen Square, Ironman on the stony shore, and east the Bastard Bolton. Then where? Asked Osha. White Harbor, the Umbers. I do not know. War everywhere. Each man against his neighbor, and winter coming. Such folly. Such black, mad folly. Maester Luwin reached up and grasped Bran's forearm, his fingers closing with a desperate strength. You must be strong now. Strong. I will be, Bran said, though it was hard. Sir Roderick killed, and Maester Luwin, everyone. Everyone. Good, the Maester said. Good boy. Your father's son, Bran. Now go. Osha gazed up at the werewoods at the red face carved in the pale trunk. And leave you for the gods? I beg, the Maester swallowed. A drink of water, and another boon, if you would. Aye, she turned to Mira. Take the boys. Whew. Oh, my heart is kind of breaking here. I'm sure that's going for everyone else. I don't care how many times I've read these freaking books and this chapter, but yeah. Jojen and Mira take charge of Rickon as Hodor carries Bran along. Osha returns a minute later, saying nothing of Luwin. She says that Hodor has to stay with Bran to be his legs. She'll take Rickon.
We'll go with Bran, said Jojen Reed.
I thought you might, said Osha. Believe I'll try the East Gate and follow the King's road a ways. We'll take the Hunter's Gate, said Mira. Hodor, said Hodor. They stopped by the kitchens first to grab some food for the road. Outside, they made their farewells. Rickon sobbed and clung to Hodor's leg until Osha gave him a smack with the butt end of her spear. Then he followed her quick enough. Shaggy Dog stalked after them. The last Bran saw of them was the direwolf's tail as it vanished behind this broken tower. All right, I'm trying not to cry. Bran and Hodor, Mira and Jojen get to the Hunter's Gate and squeeze through the bars one by one. When they cross, Bran asks the Reeds whether they'll go to Greywater Watch. Mira looked to her brother for an answer.
Our road is north, Jojen announced.
At the edge of the Wolfswood, Bran turned in his basket for one last glimpse of the castle that had been his life. Wisps of smoke still rose into the gray sky, but no more than might have risen from Winterfell's chimneys on a cold autumn afternoon. Soot stains marked some of the arrow loops, and here and there a crack or a missing merlon could be seen in the curtain wall, but it seemed little enough from this distance. Beyond, the tops of the keeps and the towers still stood as they had for hundreds of years, and it was hard to tell that the castle had been sacked and burned at all. The stone is strong, Bran told himself. The roots of the trees go deep, and under the ground the kings of winter sit their thrones. So long as those remained, Winterfell remained. It was not dead, just broken. Like me, Bran thought. I'm not dead either. I'm not dead either. And that is the synopsis for A Clash of Kings Bran 7 and the end of our synopses for A Clash of Kings proper. Let me just say it's been an honor to do this synopsis and finish my final synopsis for A Clash of Kings with you all. I am feeling that deep, bittersweet feeling that George wanted me to feel at the end of this book, but I'm strangely content. What a ride it's been, and what a chapter this one is. What did you guys think about it?
Game of Thrones, the first book in the series, ended with death paying for life. A transformation of dead wood, dead stone, and dead meat into live dragons. A Clash of Kings ends on a similar note of transcendence. In place of Drogo's funeral pyre, we have the burning ruins of Winterfell. In place of Dany's few remaining followers, we have Bran's pack of outsiders and true believers, Jojen, Mira, Osha, and Hodor. In place of dragons, we have direwolves. But the core concept stays the same, rebirth. Bran was supposedly dead, yet in this chapter, he literally emerges from the grave. Going through A Clash of Kings, we have been praising this Bran storyline. Everything that came before just feeds into this perfect ending. It's my favorite Bran chapter in A Clash of Kings and one of the best chapters in the book. It's the culmination of everything. What do you think, Manu?
Going to outdo you right out of the gate and just say this is my favorite Aswath chapter outright, and basically why I was probably asked to join you fine gentlemen today.
Absolutely.
Bran 7 is just a powerhouse of emotion, a thorough accounting of all we've lost, but also a reaffirmation of what we still have and the future that comes with it. It's been 23 chapters since we've last seen Bran. It's my obligation here to point out that Bran 7 is chapter 69 of ACOG. But that first time through, man, did it feel much longer to me than just a third of the book. I can't say I was the most astute reader my first time with Clash, so I happily bought Theon's narrative about the dead Stark boys, missing out on the hints that it was all a feint. What I didn't miss, however, was the Lannister shock at the news in Tyrion 12, and most obviously Catelyn's grief in her final Clash chapter, which you two wallowed in exquisitely in that episode. So I was carrying the death of Bran Stark on my soul that first time through. And what a release it was to see my boy alive. And not just alive, but Bran has seemingly taken his next steps, metaphysically speaking, with his newly opened third eye. That release didn't come without cost, though. The ruins of Winterfell and the scores of dead bodies are the backdrop for all this. And the tear-jerking goodbye to Master Luwin is a punctuation on that melancholy. What about you, Jeff?
That was beautifully said. I just have a question before we get into my thoughts proper. Did you watch season 2, episode 10 before you read this chapter in Clash of Kings, or did you read the books first?
I had read the books prior to watching the first season of A Game of Thrones. So I did not know, and we'll talk about it later, but I think the show kind of messed up leading up to this moment, which is why it maybe lacked some of the impact that the text had for me. But powerful stuff that first time through.
I absolutely agree. And one of the reasons why I agree is that George has famously said that he plans to end A Song of Ice and Fire on a bittersweet note. What he hopes to do is capture the same spirit that Tolkien ended The Lord of the Rings on. I believe that A Clash of Kings Bran 7 is George giving us a taste of that ultimate bittersweet conclusion to A Song of Ice and Fire. And I love how it closes this book on that note. As far as book conclusions in A Song of Ice and Fire go, I love the music of dragons ending a Game of Thrones. I can still feel the thrill of the Stoneheart reveal at the end of A Storm of Swords. In their hands, the dagger still sends shivers down my spine at the end of A Dance with Dragons. And I'm Pate the Pig Boy ending to A Feast for Crows. Yeah, we're just going to fucking skip that because the less said about that one, the better. But A Clash of Kings Bran 7 is my favorite ending to any book in A Song of Ice and Fire. It evokes a deep well of sadness and hope in me as a reader. George's art allows me to experience emotions. And I, like you, Manu, I cherish the memory of experiencing these emotions on my first read and love that George can make me still feel them here on my umpteenth read. Bran the Broken is leaving a broken Winterfell behind, but it's not dead. Winter is coming indeed, but we can dream of spring and summer. And fittingly, Bran starts this chapter dreaming or warging through summer, seeing that winter has come for his beloved castle.
I think you're right that George is giving us a glimpse of the end of the story here, and you can see that in the imagery of the opening line. The ashes fell like a soft gray snow. That's the Song of Ice and Fire right there. Ashes masquerading as snow, like how Jon's Targaryen blood is hidden beneath his Stark identity and snow name. The snow of winter embodies the ruins, the ashes of spring and summer. The final product is gray, like the ambiguous morality George loves to explore. It's the product of everything coming together as one.
Specifically, a grayness in the north and the northern cause, which was nothing but righteous through book one. But with the northern politics in play with Bran and Theon, the actions of Roose Bolton and enlistment of bloody mummers, the moral air of the north has evaporated. The stark color of white has given way to the gray, the other stark color, implying this was always there.
Absolutely, it was. Now, it's not winter yet, of course. Clash of Kings opened with the arrival of autumn, and the overall tone of the book has been autumnal. This is the bittersweet time, in which summer is still visible, but winter is encroaching upon it. If winter is death, autumn is the awareness of death. That fits Bran's story, the young fantasy reader coming of age. It especially fits his story in this book, learning to self-actualize, take control. The wolf named Summer walks on an autumn floor. Dry needles, brown leaves. We're back at the end of Theon 6. Summer is a hunter and the smell of blood draws him on. The smell of the fire, however, holds him back. All Bran can do is watch through their eyes. Sorry, one sec here. All Bran can do is watch through his eyes as their home burns.
I do like that Summer here acknowledges that fire is the most dangerous thing out of all the things in front of him. And it kind of sets up that dialectic of ice and fire kind of right here in a writ small, so to speak.
That's true. It's an escalation above the normal tensions, the normal threats that Summer is accustomed to dealing with, but he's staying back from this. It's practically apocalyptic. The fires eat up the stars. The earth shakes as buildings collapse. The sounds of killing inside the castle echo outward until they seem to fill up the whole world. Summer sees the buildings of the castle, though, described as stark against the swirling flames. The stones embody House Stark, and this chapter is about what remains, preserved against the fall. Summer and Shaggy Dog prowl through the winter town. Some buildings have burned down, others, like the castle, stay standing. But one thing stays constant. The people are gone. Dead or fled, they have vanished.
And maybe not just dead or fled, but also taken in chains to the Dreadfort, as we're going to find out in Theon's first chapter in A Dance with Dragons. And another thing I get the sense from this chapter is that there's a constant of the false night, one that obscures the light outside. First, there's the smoke from Ramsay burning Winterfell, which makes it hard to tell day from night from Summer's perspective. Then there's the fires that were, quote unquote, eating up the stars as Summer sees, and that night before the day when they emerge from the crypts. And then later in this chapter, there's the constant question about what time of day it is when the company is down in the crypts. So in thinking about this, and perhaps overanalyzing this, George may be taking a leaf from an event from Return of the King, the third book in Lord of the Rings, known as the Dawnless Day, which is an event which occurs just prior to the Siege of Gondor, where Baragon tells Pippin, "This is no weather of the world. This is some device of his malice, some broil of fume from the mountain of fire that he sends to darken hearts and counsel." As we've been talking a lot in our journey so far in A Song of Ice and Fire, the actions of the nobility serve as metaphor for how the others operate. And here I wonder if all of this unnatural darkness is a metaphor for the long night, the apocalyptic and unnatural dying of the light that the others will bring. As Sam will muse about in both his first chapter in A Feast for Crows and John's first chapter in A Dance with Dragons, do the others bring the night or do they come with the night? The answer so far as season 8 is concerned, and as far as the metaphor is for this chapter is concerned, is that they bring the night with them. But in darkness, there is still light. Summer can still perceive the night and the stars and the rising sun, even amidst all the smoke. And that's a similar dynamic down in the crypts with no one sure what time of day it is. As Stannis will say in The Storm of Swords, the darkness will devour them all. Thank goodness that Bran and Summer are here.
And when that darkness passes, nature emerges to bring up the bodies. The feasting crows and wild dogs alike retreat before the direwolves, the princes of the wood. This is still their domain, and everyone knows it. Summer and Shaggy kill a dying horse and then fight over the meat. George wants us to never forget that the wolves are hunters, that predators rule nature. Same goes for the Starks. We first met kindly old Dad Ned as an executioner. We might like the Starks more than the Lannisters or Greyjoys, but our heroes are still part of the Pyramid of Death. Bran wants to stay a wolf, because in their natural state, even predators are innocent. They kill only to eat, with no malice. They are free of the awareness of mortality that defines man. We know we're ultimately headed for, quote, the House of Whispers where all men were blind, claimed by the cold fingers of death. As a direwolf, Bran can pretend he'll run forever under the trees and skies. Not so as a man. Not anymore. When last we covered a Bran chapter, he was still Theon's prisoner. We only learned about his escape through Theon's eyes, and then it turned out that Theon never found the Stark boys after all. It's become a major mystery. Where has Team Bran actually been this whole time? I love how George slow rolls the reveal in this chapter, allowing him to focus on the imagery and the thematic importance of the crypts for Bran, not just the shock of the reveal.
Yeah, I really like how he starts you with that sensory rich point of view of summer. It creates a, goddamn it, stark contrast to the void Bran is in. But at the same time, you see the darkness and hear the emptiness and smell the rankness, as if George writing Summer tuned up our senses so we can soak in what Bran and co have been experiencing for however long they've been down in the crypts.
Yeah, and I think there's a possibility too that George slow rolling this reveal leads us to believe as readers that we're in Summer's perspective at the first part of this chapter. That maybe that's all that's left of Bran. Maybe he actually did die somewhere out in the wilderness and in nature, and that's why we're in Summer's point of view, because that's the only vantage point that Bran is surviving from. But as it turns out, that is not the actual only place that Bran is surviving. That is only his third eye opening. I think I love this slow motion reveal too, because it's a callback to Bran's first chapter in A Clash of Kings, when Bran howls like a wolf despite Luwin telling him to stop howling because he's the Prince of Winterfell and needs to act like a prince. Here, Bran is actually occupying the role of an actual wolf. He is no longer simply pretending to be a wolf. He's actually occupying the role of a wolf, being inside the body of Summer. What also reminded me of too is how like the darkness is reaching for Summer here in this chapter. It reminds me of almost like death reaching for Bran in that trippy dream chapter that he had back in Bran's third chapter in A Game of Thrones, with death reaching for him and then him flying. You can understand why Summer is reluctant to go down to the darkness, because there is almost a metaphorical death associated with the darkness, and that means that that Summer is reluctant to go down there. One, because it's dark. Two, because he's no longer free and he's trapped in the darkness. And three, he ends up going back to being Bran the Broken.
That it's all that sensory richness you guys are talking about. Bran 7 is one of the most gorgeously written chapters in the series, with imagery so potent it's more cinematic than most movies. Every paragraph feels like it's sculpted out of smoke, a contradictory mix of transience and permanence. Bran has opened his third eye, and this is what that looks like, sounds like, smells like. He has escaped the cage of consciousness and accessed the texture of time. He is now part god. Bran is an Arthurian Fisher King figure whose fortunes rise and fall with the land. Like Jesus, he stays away 3 days before his rebirth, surrounded by his acolytes. It's a shamanic awakening that stands in sharp contrast to the grounded realities of his body. Still disabled, surrounded by his beloved dead, as well as those still alive. There's one moment in James Cameron's Avatar that still holds up for me, when the protagonist has just experienced his avatar body for the first time, and then has to remember that as a human, he can't run and jump. Both Cameron and George R. R. Martin are drawing on the ancient idea that you can only open your third eye by undergoing some sort of physical trial or even a sacrifice. There is a cost to wielding this immense power. And that's dramatically satisfying. You don't want your characters to suffer no consequences. Dany feels alienated, a lonely god above everyone else. Beric Dondarrion loses the memories of his old life. And Bran thinks he's forgetting how to speak. He thinks of his mortal eyes as the blind to, compared to his third eye. The problem with acquiring a sixth sense is that your ordinary five start to seem hateful, a cruel farce that cuts you off from yourself and the world. Once you start climbing the tower, you don't want to stop until you fall, or jump like Euron. Bran doesn't understand why Jojen is trying to pull him back. I get why he's frustrated. Jojen was the one trying to open his third eye. It feels to Bran like Jojen just won't ever be satisfied with him. Jojen knows that Bran must inhabit a liminal space to save the world. He must be forever in between, both god and man, not tilting over either side. I think this makes Jojen the wisest of the magical mentor figures in A Clash of Kings. Unlike Melisandre, he does not indulge his protege's ego. Unlike Jaqen H'ghar or Quaithe, he sticks around to make sure his protege stays on the path. Perhaps this is part of why Bran winds up the center of the story. Naturally, this relatively responsible path is unsatisfying, especially for Bran, a little kid who thought he'd never get to feel free and happy in his body again. George has said that Bran is the most difficult POV for him to write because of his age, but I think he does a great job. We get a sense of both Bran's childish frustration and the adult motivations driving his mentors. We see the danger. Bran is starting to forget his human body needs food, that Summer's prey won't nourish him. At the same time, Bran is not motivated by a pure lust for power. He loves being able to spend time with his wolf and to speak to Jon in his dreams. Why wouldn't he want to spend his days in the world of his childhood instead of coming back to the reality where everyone is dead or otherwise fallen?
Traversing the crypts embodies that bittersweetness that George Martin has spoken about and Jeff spoke about just a few minutes ago. They are at once traversing a hall of kings, but also the hall of the dead, of greatness and sadness all at once. It's a walking history lesson, and I imagine where most of the Stark lineage gets first mentioned in these books to be expanded on later on and in supplemental materials, very similar to Bran's last chapter in A Game of Thrones in that way. Jojen telling Bran he was gone 3 days and the wolf eating is not the same as Bran eating. If Bran's story is in part about rebuilding himself, he has to know his name and his own identity to do that. I'm not dead either. It starts with I. If we wish to heal, we have to take fair measure of ourselves, and that's what Jojen is asking of Bran here. It's a cruel irony that his warging allows him to connect to his brothers, be it Ghost or Jon. Some of his most intimate relationships are now relegated to the other self, and that's going to be another test of Bran's humanity. Bran's final chapter in A Game of Thrones has him descend to the crypts, in what would ultimately lead to him learning about the death of his father. It's all very sorrowful then. This time round, we see Bran emerging from the crypts, a rebirth of sorts, as previously mentioned. He leaves the darkness and warmth of the womb, a son birthed of Winterfell in Stark history. And the fact that he and his pals found refuge in the tomb meant for Ned Stark, that even in death, Ned is still protecting the children. I mean, I just get misty-eyed thinking about that. And thinking about it, it reminds me a lot of that dead direwolf they found in the snow way back in Bran 1. The dead parent, but still suckling the children and keeping them safe and warm in that way. And then you have that Bran's last look back at his tomb, thinking he saw sadness in his dad's eyes, which I feel when you define Ned Stark, the thing you define his eyes with is it has sadness in them. So I found it all very emotional without really highlighting that emotion in the text, but just the simple fact it's in Ned's tomb just says so much about what's happening here emotionally and familially.
All of this speaks to the power of history and heritage, how it can be simultaneously an enduring strength and a weight on your shoulders. Time only runs one way for us. Every step we take is forward, whether we like it or not. As soon as we experience a moment, it's over. It becomes a statue, a crypt. A king becomes a rock for Osha to piss on. We project our present selves into those past vessels. We can't bring the dead back, yet we can't help ourselves from trying. It's what our brains do. It's why stories work so well on us. They stand fallen time on its feet again. Bran is starting to break the borders, producing what George describes as double vision. Bran can look above ground and below at the same time. He sees the acorn within the tree within the acorn. Like Dany in the House of the Undying, he sees the structure of his reality, which is the structure of story. While most of us don't open our third eye, we all experience moments in which our lives change. Bran thinks that his father's ghost wants him to stay, but it's time to leave, forge his own future. That is universal. So too is Bran's realization that even as he picks up the sword of manhood, this is only another type of game, another mask to wear. Growing up is not the process of finally becoming who you are. It's the realization that you will never, ever be done becoming who you are. Fantasy, like a ghost, is a mirror we use to make sense of ourselves. Bran looks down the line of dead kings, all the fantasy protagonists that have come before him with their sagas, their myths. They never scared him, he thinks. Death never scared him, because he knew he'd be coming here. The font of legend, like the warehouse at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, ready to be reborn in story. There's my favorite Indiana Jones moment from Last Crusade when he yells at the villain, "It belongs in a museum!" And the bad guy yells back, "So do you." Myth is the only immortality. Only after you are gone do you become a fixed point, frozen in the eye of the beholder. To live, as Bran knows now, is to be uncertain where you will rest. It would be easier to stay down in the darkness with your dreams of the dead. But what did they die for? Except that you might one day live.
And those moments that you and Manu were referencing and talking about stepping out of the darkness and Bran leaving his dad behind are powerful. And I think they're both connected. To leave the crypts, Bran has to leave the physical visage of his father behind. He has to accept that his dad is truly gone and is never returning. Now, when we talk about Bran's mentor figures in A Song of Ice and Fire, Ned seemingly doesn't feature very prominently in fan discussions, with most of that discussion centering around Jojen and Bloodraven being those kind of dual mentors, and Luwin and Roderick Cassell also occupying similar places. However, we should always remember that our first chapter after the Game of Thrones prologue, also the first chapter written for A Song of Ice and Fire proper, is from Bran's point of view, where his dad mentors Bran about why he killed the man that deserved from the Night's Watch, and that the only time a man can be brave is when he's afraid. Bran is afraid here. He knows what awaits the party when they cross the darkness to light, but he presses on anyways. So as he leaves his dad behind, he keeps his dad with him. Luwin will later tell Bran that he is Ned Stark's son, and that's so fucking true. Bran's bravery in stepping from darkness to light is keeping Ned's flame alight. The only time a man can be brave is when he's afraid.
Our heroes emerge into the light to confirm Bran's wolf dreams. Winterfell has been viciously sacked. They've gone from one tomb to another. They stood huddled together with ruin and death all around them. Once again, the dominant color in George's palette is gray, and he wreathes every image in smoke. This is the death of childhood innocence.
Bran knows what awaits him, but he is still fearful. As we all know, horror can only be the fear of unknowing. Sorry, I hate to bring the extreme online discourse to your podcast, but I guess that's what happens when you have me on. But sometimes the greatest fears we have are already realized. They've already happened. It's only our confronting them that awaits, our processing of that, our catharsis with it. And as I mentioned, there's an accounting going on here of lives lost, of horses, of supplies, of structures not made of stone, but also an emotional accounting of, our traumas and the scars that we bear at this point. But as Bran so astutely will notice eventually that the walls seem unharmed.
Everywhere they wander, they see the people and places of Bran's youth destroyed. Even the gargoyles have fallen in the same place Bran did. It's as if he's looking back on that traumatic moment and fully processing it, as you were saying, by watching it happen to something else, to the castle itself. The gargoyles have shattered into so many pieces that Bran thinks it's a miracle he's alive at all. That's the silver lining in this cloud. A body lies nearby. Bran can't tell who he is. The body may as well be Bran's. That's the man he could have been, the life he could have lived. The floors, the walls, the beams of the first keep have burned away. The tower itself remains, but hollowed out of all that gave it life. The same dynamic applies to the castle as a whole. The great granite walls are untouched. Everything within has burned. It's so devastating to imagine the greenhouse smashed and the plants within torn up, the spring-fed hot water gushing out onto the ground. The loss here extends beyond the Stark family, even beyond the permanent year-round residents of the castle. Winterfell's life-giving properties help nurture the whole north through winter. It's why the winter town exists at all. But now, the crops have been exposed, the hot water wasted. Ramsay, the bastard of Bolton, the devil on Theon's shoulder, has defiled the Garden of Paradise.
Yeah, there's a real nihilism in all of this destruction. The sense that Ramsay and his boys didn't give a flying fuck about how Winterfell served as the last resort when the cold winds rise. And we should remember, this was not done by the Iron Men. This was done by Northmen, people who have lived in the North and knew the deprivations of winter itself. The glass gardens, the hot springs, these were the means of keeping the people alive when a potential years-long winter arises. And that long winter is coming rather soon in this story. In a geopolitical context, yeah, an utterly ruined Winterfell does not serve long-term Bolton interests as much as it might have felt good to them. As we talked about in Theon 6, this destruction was likely ordered by Roose Bolton, and you can read this nihilistic violence in the context of the bloody history of the Stark-Bolton conflict, captured really well in A Dance with Dragons, as well as The World of Ice and Fire. I'm sure it felt good to Bruce Bolton that his son smashed up the castle of Winterfell that his forefathers failed to capture and to smash up themselves. But it's utterly fucking stupid from a geopolitical and tactical standpoint to do that. For one, the castle is the most impregnable castle in the north, and it serves as a visible symbol of legitimacy in the north. When we get back to the north in A Dance with Dragons, Roose will decide in Barrowton to host the marriage of Ramsay and Faria, that is Jane Poole, at Winterfell because, even ruined and broken, Winterfell remains Lady Arya's home. What better place to wed her, bed her, and stake your claim? Hey, Roose, maybe don't ruin and break Winterfell? Guys, maybe occupy the castle instead, claim you liberated the castle from the Greyjoys and keep it intact. Might do you all some good in the long term. Nope, burn the castle down because it feels good to psychopaths to destroy shit, and they can say they were avenging their history. From another standpoint, all of this destruction wrought by the Boltons means that they just burned up all of the food that would keep them alive during the winter. More than keep them alive, even if everyone is righteously aghast at what Ramsay did, the people have to eat. And though they might not like the idea of bringing a please, sir, I want some more bowls for the Boltons, the alternative for the small folk is starvation. Nuking Winterfell is utterly bananas, man. Ramsay has denied the Boltons the ability to potentially rule on in perpetuity in the north. But what does it matter to someone like Ramsay Snow, and Roose Bolton?
Ramsay especially embodies just chaos and no forethought, no consideration for the future. I think it's no accident that the library tower is the one losing all its hot water. For George, story is lifeblood. What more potent symbol of destruction could there be than a library bleeding out onto the ground? One heartbreaking moment sums it all up. Rickon shouts that he wants to go home. But he is home. Or is he? He doesn't recognize it. Home was horses and apple cakes, as he says. Home was his parents. Maybe home is a time, not a place. And now their time in Winterfell as children is over.
As often is the case, this much violence is hard to wrap your head around and understand. Perhaps that's what obscures home from Rickon and recognition. Bran's instinct is to blame Theon, but Osha looks deeper. The Ironborn number the dead along with Stark loyalists, and the sigil of the flayed man is found nearby. The flayed man of the Dreadfort. But before Bran can even finish that sentence, Summer beckons them to the Godswoods. Returning back to this chapter after my first time reading, I had some trouble parsing exactly all what went down in the last Theon chapter because, as you guys described, it's just a clusterfuck of chaos, for lack of a better word. So I was right there with Bran and Osha trying to put together the pieces. And I swear I'm not like illiterate like Jeff, and I usually read very critically. But, I'll admit the first time through A Clash of Kings, I could say maybe my interest in the Theon Davos chapters were just a little less than Arya and Jon and Tyrion. So I missed out on some of that. So I was trying to pick up the pieces just like Bran and Osha were here. But I do like the fact that the Godswood, the heart of Winterfell, is also untouched by all this. And Bran, metaphorically, as the heart of Winterfell, he too, not untouched, but he survived this wave of violence. The heart beats on, the heart goes on. The heart of winter may not be that far north of the wall. It might be in Bran Stark and the Godswoods of Winterfell. There's a power in a living wood, which is an affirmation from Jojen, but also Bran's going to be a fucking tree wizard here. So I just like that play of language.
Oh, yeah, that's ultimately his own power that he's going to realize he's accessing at the end of the day. And yeah, the one part of the castle that defeated the flames is, of course, the Godswood. Jojen seems to read Bran's thoughts. The wood is alive, more alive than the rest of the castle, with ancient magic all to itself. Like the crypt, this is where a shard of Stark energy is preserved through time. Ironically, the Godswood is an oasis in this chapter for the most secular man in the castle, the man who said even gods die, Maester Luwin. Yet again, George emphasizes the gray colors, the gray eyes, Bran notes, the gray hair, the gray robes, the gray castle, now all stained blood red.
It's just the purest, simplest form of emotion here. How do you heal the healer, Bran thinks? An innocent but altogether breathtaking sentiment from the child. And on the opposite end of the age spectrum, Luwin, just palpable relief and joy, knowing that Bran and Rickon are alive and the fact that he got to see them one last time.
It's so sad for the Starklings to lose someone else they love. Again, they are forced to grow up, to accept that Adults don't always know what to do. As you say, you're relying on the healer, and once you get past them, turns out there's just nothing. But this is overall a happy, redemptive moment for Luwin himself. He dies by his own choice, knowing that he kept his word to keep the Stark boys safe. It makes for an interesting contrast with Maester Crescent on Dragonstone. A Clash of Kings opens and closes with the death of Maesters, the rational written world falling to its knees before emblems of the irrational sublime, Melisandre at the beginning of the book, and the Heart Tree here. But Crescent's story was a tragedy in miniature. He saw Stannis, his unloved surrogate son, sell his soul, and Crescent himself betrayed his values by trying to poison Melisandre. He loses and dies for it. Luwin, by contrast, gives way with grace to a world he doesn't understand. The power of the Godswood allowed him to live long enough to see his surrogate sons one last time. The secular mentor says, "The gods are good." That perfectly sets up Bran to unite the political and magical worlds of A Clash of Kings.
And while this chapter opens with the metaphysical and ends with the personal, we get touches of the political right here, with Luwin catching Bran and Osha up on what has transpired in the North. Nowhere safe? And Bran also gets a moment to mourn Sir Roderick, another caretaker and father figure gone. Everyone.
Exactly. I love that thought from Bran. Everyone. Bran has to step up and be strong, as Luwin says. And he will, because he's Ned's son. He was introduced in the story learning this model. That's all the harder, as you say, because the Starks are heading out into a politically fragmented North, with fewer allies than ever before. On reread, it's clear that the internal northern strife in A Clash of Kings, the Hornwood inheritance crisis and all that, exists in large part so that Bran doesn't have a clear refuge to run to at this point of the story. That basically forces him to trust his magical side instead, heading north beyond the wall with the Reeds. Besides his encounter with the Little in A Storm of Swords, who kind of lets him know what the state of play is, Bran's journey north is focused on sorceress and environmental matters, rather than political. His farewell to Maester Luwin puts his political side on ice, but Luwin is concerned above all with Bran and Rickon's safety, knowing their future importance for the politics.
Oh, is it time for me to talk about HBO's Game of Thrones, bitches?
Hell yeah.
Yes.
You may remember me from my old podcast, A Scene of Ice and Fire. We never quite got to this scene, but one of my issues with season 2 is the general Bran death handling. Not playing the recard and then hiding Theon's murder or Theon's murder not becoming public knowledge so that Cat and Robb did not have Bran's death weighing on them, kind of defangs a lot of that sorrow that I think I was talking about earlier in this episode. All that aside, this final scene with Donald Sumter is just masterful acting, tugging at your heartstrings with every word, reaching out for Bran when he sees him. You can just feel that yearning in Maester Luwin's heart. And they did, a very classic adaptation thing here. They beefed up Luwin's dialogue. They gave him more to say to Bran in a heartfelt way, like, I brought you into this world and I got to live with you every day since then. It's just very touching, fatherly type words. And my favorite piece of dialogue adapted here was they took that last line from Bran's chapter, I'm not dead either, and they kind of externalized it in a form of dialogue where Bran says, they burned everything. And then Maester Luwin just looks at him and is like, not everything, not you. And that part just always gets me because it's just a reaffirmation when you kind of strip away some of the Game of Thrones and the castles and the, pageantry. It's the people that really matter. And I like that centering of humanity here in this moment. And then, of course, Sumter nodding at Natalie Tina's knife, asking for another boon with his eyes. And then Natalie Tina having these deathly sad eyes in response. And the Stark Winterfell leitmotif swelling as she unsheaths the dagger. And then you cut away to the long shot of the group walking away from a burning Winterfell. I think as a singular scene, it's one of the best that Game of Thrones did. And I think it's maybe the most touching death scene to me of the ones that I knew was coming, at least. Just because I think it elevated, or at least it deepened my love for it in a way that maybe some of the other ones didn't. And I just wanted to talk about that a little bit.
No, I love that because, me, I give the Throne show as much shit as anyone, as everyone. But yeah, they nailed this scene masterfully. Because you had inspired me, I actually gave this scene a rewatch yesterday. And wow, Lewin talking about how he's known Brandon Rickon's faces since the day they were born and how he considers himself very, very lucky. Just outstanding writing by, oh shit, D&D wrote this episode? Give those men some Emmys. The show did, I think, a really good job of economically adapting Bran 7 to a 3-minute, 58-second scene from season 2's Valar Morghulis, and it's just wonderfully written and just condenses the material really well. One thing I love from the books that didn't make it onto the screen is this line as Bran is carried away from Lewin. Low branches whipped at Bran's face as they pushed between the trees, and the leaves brushed away his tears. On a literary level, I think George might be borrowing from the Bible yet again. He borrows from the Bible quite a lot, and specifically the book of Revelations, chapter 22, verse 4. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. The old order is truly passing for Bran. His father is dead. His manners of Roger Cassell and Maester Lewin are gone now as well. The politics I love so dearly when we cover Bran 2 have been not necessarily replaced, but they've been added onto by the ethereal world. Jojen, who has been occupying a larger mentor role in training Bran's magical side, is coming onto center stage, and Bloodraven will follow in A Dance with Dragons and The Winds of Winter. Still, there's something beautiful about the scene beyond the passing of a phase of life. It reminds me of the heavy rains that fall over Robb and Catelyn and the rest of the Northmen as they journey to the Twins. There, the author, as Stephen Atwell's talked about, is like the narrative and the author are weeping for the coming deaths, knowing that death was coming for those characters that were beloved by us. Here, this scene feels like nature taking pity on Bran, comforting him at his loss. But if you read it in another way, the leaves of the godswood brushing Bran's tears away reads like the magical part of the world comforting Bran as at his loss. Or read another way, it may be the answer to the question Bran posed to Lewin back in his first chapter in A Clash of Kings. Do dead men dream? Bran asked. Some say yes, some no, Maester Lewin answered. The dead themselves are silent on the matter. Call me horrifically idealistic and romantic here, but I wonder whether this is the dead Lewin now dreaming, living on in the godswood itself, comforting Bran at his deep, deep loss.
I love that. I've always thought about, the wind in the trees after someone has passed might be their last presence trying to give you comfort. And, that can be a very glib or shallow idea if presented thoughtlessly. But here I think there is a real sense that Lewin is still present at some level. Bran 7 is a beautifully written chapter all the way through, but what makes it one of the best chapters in A Clash of Kings is how it ends. Jeff spoke so well earlier about what an effective ending this passage is for A Clash of Kings, and I agree. It's the best ending of any book in the series.
Yeah, I'm just here to be extremely in my feelings about this ending. We remember how that last paragraph ends, but it opens with the Wallop too. One last glimpse of the castle that had been his life. Bran's the last Stark to have his physical call to adventure, but he too, like his brothers and sisters, must leave home. And Bran noting that in spite of the smoke, the castle from afar looks mostly unharmed. He's taking that analytical 3,000-foot view of the situation, something he very metaphysically does whenever he dreams of flying and, all that. So, and I love the phrase, the stone is strong, because it just invokes the seed is strong. Rock and stone, tree and seed, imagery of the children of the forest. It's something more eternal than, this human flesh, so to speak. And just like the latter line, the seed is strong, refers to the vitality of the Baratheon line, the former, the stone is strong, represents the same for the Starks, but perhaps, again, in a grander, more ethereal sense, not just, limited to the realms of men.
And that reaching for something grander, that kind of swelling upwards feeling, I think is so key to how this chapter ends. We talk a lot in life about achieving perspective or putting things into context. These can often feel like abstract and unhelpful terms. It is difficult to concretely capture these concepts because the whole idea of context and perspective is that there is more to life than the concrete. This last paragraph in the chapter expands Bran's consciousness, and with it, the reader's. It embeds the POV, the eye of the beholder, into the fabric of reality, collapsing the spaces between us all. The thing I am looking at, Bran thinks, that lifeless structure of stone, is like me. It is a metaphor for me, and I am a metaphor for it. We explain each other, incomplete without each other, like a story and its audience. Granite does not burn easily, as Stannis says. The castle can be rebuilt in time. It's not the walls that make a lord, it's the man. I don't think George has ever done a better job distilling the essence of myth and how it resonates in the confusing mess of an individual life. Bran is Orpheus looking back at Eurydice. He is Christ saying that his apostles are his family now. He is David Bowman at the end of 2001: A Space Odyssey, gazing into his own perpetually aging self. And I was going to monologue about movies for one of the most cinematic chapters in the story. The spiritual power of Bran 7 reminds me of 3 movies in particular. Kubrick's 2001, Andrei Tarkovsky's Mirror, and sorry to bring up the Soviets, Jeff, please forgive me for that unconscionable sin, and Terrence Malick's The Tree of Life. All 3 of these great works encapsulate the human condition through poetic means. And what I mean by that is they are built around gaps in between images. The images are dazzling, standing in for life itself. The gaps are provocative, standing in for unknown, mysterious elements outside life, death, rebirth, and divinity. 2001: A Space Odyssey is about evolution. Not physical evolution so much as the evolution of consciousness and thought, the Knights of the Mind, to put it in Maester Lewin's terms. The dawn of man, as the movie declares it at the beginning, is the food chain, basically, eating and being eaten, like Bran's life inside Summer. Then the famous monolith descends, the hand of God from above, like the three-eyed crow expanding Bran's vision. Man looks up the monolith into the sky and sees the moon calling to him. It's the birth of imagination, the inner life of metaphor and dreams. The image awakens in man not only the ability to fashion a club from a bone, but to envision killing an animal of that same species with it. Like Bran, early man sees death within life, and vice versa. It's the double vision, as George called it, a poetic leap that allows man to conquer his environment. The thrill of expanding consciousness is checked by the violent, selfish ends to which man puts his intelligence. Like Bran in Bloodraven's Cave, modern man in 2001 is forced through another transformation. Dave Bowman journeys beyond the infinite. There, he watches himself die and is reborn as the messianic star child, ready to go home. It's the Odyssey, after all, and Bran is going through the same arc. Tarkovsky's Mirror, by contrast, is about one guy, the disembodied mind of the director, expressed through the POV of the camera and voiceover narration. The opening shot is a little boy turning on a TV and seeing nothing but static. The second shot is a young man struggling past his stutter to state his name for the camera. The third is the narrator's mother sitting on a fence staring out at a field, as the voiceover tells us they're watching for his father, who will never return. Taken together, these images imply a story. The director is searching for his origins. He cannot find them by conventional means. He must remake himself in storytelling. He must assert himself in the mirror of movie making. You have to infer a lot like that to make sense of Mirror, which winds up being the whole point of Mirror. The director's search is doomed by his limited perspective. He casts the same woman as his mother and his wife, the same boy as himself and his son, representing his memories and present life blurring together. The story of Mirror is the director's desperate desire to put these pieces together. At the end, he gives way in grace, releasing a symbolic bird from his hand, allowing it to fly through his past, present, and future, united. Bran, too, saw a bird flying through his dreams, and he, too, is trying to make sense of the foggy fragments of his life. The main recurring iconic image of Mirror is a childhood home on fire, and the same applies here. Bran is searching through the charred ruins of his childhood. As with the protagonist of Mirror, his ghosts seem to come to life in the crypt. Terrence Malick's The Tree of Life is basically 2001 crossed with Mirror. It's the story of the evolution of man and also the story of one random guy. The influence of both older movies is obvious. The cosmic sequences of Tree of Life echo those of 2001, and Jessica Chastain in Tree of Life is frequently shot in the exact same angles and poses of the mother figure in Mirror. The Tree of Life argues all of existence is captured in the individual soul, and vice versa. Every death is the heat death of the universe. Every act of love mirrors the creation. The mother figure becomes Job, demanding that God answer for her suffering. God's response is context, perspective. Oh, your son died? Well, so did every single dinosaur. What, are you special or something? The entire movie takes place in a fraction of a second, on the anniversary of the dead man's death, mourned by his brother, the protagonist. Literally all of space-time is compressed into that heartbeat in which he mourns. At the climax, all the walls fall. A mask drifts into the ocean. The protagonist meets his past self, his young mother, his brother reborn. And then they can all move on to wherever they're going next. The final shot in the movie is a bridge reaching out from an island towards the screen, towards you. The immortal link of myth has been forged, not only between the characters, but between the movie and you and the audience. This was your story all along. A bastard boy is worth everything against the kingdom. Every mirror is a space odyssey. Bran 7 shows us his place and ours in the tree of life. There's that a line from A Tree of Life I love that applies to, I think, what Bran takes away here. The only way to be happy is to love. Unless you love, your life will flash by.
God, I love your cinematic analysis, dude. It's so
Thank
good.
you, sir. Thank you for listening to all
Like,
of it. I
if
appreciate
I was
it.
to try to do that, it's like 2001. Well, Theon's like the guy in the monkey suit who gets mauled by the tiger that's played by Ramsey.
He sure is.
It was not dead, just broken. Like me, I'm not dead either. After a chapter of walking around Winterfell to see what's gone and what remains, Bran finally turns that lens inward. It's an honest assessment. While Bran has called himself broken several times before, this is seemingly the first time that sentiment isn't centered and a source of sadness. I really, really like that he follows up, like me, I'm not dead either, instead of saying, I'm just broken. Feels like he's begun to start looking past his fall to the next step as he journeys beyond Winterfell. This chapter is powerful and cathartic in its own right, with a focus on personal healing and rebuilding. But right now, at the tail end of COVID, we're all emerging from our holes after a long time in the dark, trying to pick up the pieces of broken lives and broken societies. We've lost too many loved ones to count, and everything around us feels like it's burning and broken. But sobbing, we all take another step. We're not dead either. And I've been going through some stuff of late, and revisiting this chapter at this time couldn't be more welcome. It gives us time and space for our misery and our sadness, while also ending on a hopeful note that reinvigorates the reader. It's been very therapeutic to dive into this, so thank you guys again for having me.
Yeah, man, it's our absolute pleasure, and we're so pleased to do this chapter with you. And I love analyzing the Song of Ice and Fire. I know you do too, and theorizing about it. And it's the emotions that really bring us together, all of us from our disparate backgrounds. And it's a pleasure having you to join us for our final chapter in A Clash of Kings, in this sorrowful yet hopeful chapter too. It's beautiful, and it speaks to me personally as well as it spoke to you. And right before the powerful ending of A Clash of Kings, I love the way that Bran's final statement is framed. Within the walls of Winterfell, death and destruction abound, and horrors await them as they emerge from the crypts. And yet, the farther they move from Winterfell, the less it looks like devastation. Wisps of smoke still rose into the gray sky, but no more than might have risen from Winterfell's chimneys on a cold autumn afternoon. Soot stains mark some of the arrow loops, and here and there a crack or a missing merlon could be seen in the curtain wall. But it seemed little enough from this distance. Beyond, the tops of the keeps and the tower still stood as they had for hundreds of years, and it was hard to tell that the castle had been sacked and burned at all. Like I was saying, we've all felt this chapter deeply. We feel the brokenness and the agony of seeing a place we fell in love with go down hard. We're offended by the defilement of a sacred place because this was our first castle we really got to know in a Game of Thrones. It was sacred ground for us as readers, and George has made us feel like this place, much as he does with the ship Fever Dream in his book, Fever Dream, is a living character in the story of A Song of Ice and Fire. Coming back to this chapter now, this chapter would almost feel like the death of a character. It's Ned dying, or Catelyn, or Robb, or Quentin, all those characters that we care about dying. But George only wants us to take us to the brink here. He doesn't want to push us over into utter pessimism because the stone is strong. The roots are sunk deep. Ramsay Snow, Roose Bolton, Walder Frey, Tywin Lannister, they'll all be dead long before this castle was actually dead. It ain't dead because Winterfell still stands, and one boy will live on, perhaps even longer than Winterfell itself.
Bran may be the future God King around which everything orbits, but he is also a lonely little boy who has lost the only home he has ever known. It's still strong from a distance, and now that distance is going to grow. As his context and perspective changes, Bran must rely on himself. He is setting out on the road, Tolkien's road, the eternal road at the heart of high fantasy, bringing the past into the present, on and on. In order to learn how to live, we fall back on story and myth, candle flames flickering on the stone faces behind us. And they did the same thing. I brought up Stanley Kubrick in 2001 earlier. He was interviewed by Playboy around the time of its release. And they asked him near the end of the interview basically how he kept going, if he sincerely believed, as the movie expresses, that there is no inherent meaning to life. His response is probably my favorite short statement by any artist. And it gets at the same existentialist spirit of this chapter, the same stubborn will to live. He said, "The most terrifying fact about the universe is not that it is hostile, but that it is indifferent. But if we can come to terms with this indifference, then our existence as a species can have genuine meaning. However vast the darkness, we must supply our own light."
That's well said. And I think for Bran, he's infusing the meaning of his own life by his last looks at Winterfell. He knows it's just a castle. It's just stones and walls and places, but it's also a home. And he sees himself in those old stones. Part of what makes this such a powerfully emotive statement at the end of Bran's story is how the thoughts about Winterfell are coming from Bran himself, a kid who has every right to give in to despair, given everything he's been through in his narrative arc. But he doesn't give in to despair. Bran is going to live on, much as Winterfell will. And even if the stones topple, the roots of the place are deep. The history and memory of Winterfell will live long in the memory of the Godswood. The memory of the singers are interwoven within the heart tree itself. The Stark kings and lords have their crypt statues deep underground, and the fires of the Ramsays of this world cannot touch them in memory. Winterfell and Bran are strong. The castle can be rebuilt, and Bran will never walk again, but he will fly.
So well said, sir. Perfect way to wrap it up. Moving on to a foreshadowing and groundwork. So there's the great winged snake that Summer sees above Winterfell that has caused much discussion, as such things tend to on the internet. And that could be foreshadowing for R plus L equals J, or possibly an allusion to dragon eggs hidden underneath the castle. I don't know how much farther I want to take that one. I think probably R plus L equals J is the most solid way to think about it.
I got nothing to add to that. That sounds about as much as I could extract from it. But Jeff, what do you think?
I mean, there's been like a lot of theories that Summer saw an actual dragon flying over Winterfell, but I think like the context of it makes it clear that it's not an actual dragon, because Summer gets smoke in his eyes and he blinks for a second. And he sees the smoke forming into a dragon. It kind of reminds me of, I'm sure you guys have done this when you're kids, looking up into the sky and seeing clouds up there and being like, "Oh, there's a spaceship. That one up there, that one looks like a submarine, and that one looks like a blimp flying over the air." So I don't think it's an actual dragon, but I do think it symbolizes R plus L equals J. I think it could also be an allusion to the fact that dragons will come to Winterfell at the end of the story in the form of Dany's 3 dragons coming up to save the day and fight the others at the end of the story.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think I understand the temptation to make a lot of this and say, "Oh, it's a literal dragon," but it's like then, we get to a Storm of Swords and it's like no reports of dragons rampaging around the countryside or anything. Right. So if this was going to be literal, it would have been a thing by now. So so much of this chapter feels literally and metaphorically like a dream, in the same way that Tyrion didn't literally lose his mouth in his last chapter. That was just part of his guilt and part of his dreamscape. And I think same thing here.
Yeah, we do the next one, or?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
Okay. So, second bit of foreshadowing is that Hodor opens the door here, and as his name hints, he will hold the door later on here. It's kind of funny coming back that we talked about this at significant length, and that we didn't know that Hodor was an actual mystery. That was something we had to unlock about Hodor's name until it was revealed in season 6 of the show. But when you go back and you read these Bran chapters, you start to see a lot of the foreshadowing that George is integrating into Hodor's name, meaning hold the door.
Yeah, and I think of it as like the inversion thing, or where George R.R. Martin likes to take the same thing and then kind of change like one variable in it. And, you know, kind of like how Bran descended into the crypts to end a Game of Thrones and then comes out of it to end a Clash of Kings. Here we have Hodor opening a door. I honestly have no idea if he's going to be holding a door shut, lifting a door, walking through it. I mean, it's hold the door, I guess, but what that actually means in a specific sense, you can hold a door open, you can hold a door shut. But I do like the fact that it might be an inverse of it. But what I really like is just Hodor chanting Hodor as like a war cry, or as,
Yes.
you know, just kind of just like work himself up and psych himself up as he's doing it, and just like Hodor, 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 and just him going through it. I can really feel that, you know, you're rooting for the big guy in that situation. So that's what I really like about it.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. It's you know, this, you were saying earlier, Manu, about how this connects to his last chapter in book 1. It seems like with Bran, like with a lot of, you know, kind of fabled and mythological characters, they were kind of always going through the same kind of process, the same kind of trial, just with the surface appearance changed around a bit and kind of progressing forward in time. And Hodor was always present and kind of always in the background, and, you know, he'll be brought to a more crucial importance later on. But yeah, I agree. You definitely, you know, you feel for his part in the task here, because without him, they are all dead. Like they would all, you know, the story ends right here. They all starve to death in the crypt, and no one ever finds out what happens to them. So really, really, Hodor saves all their lives.
Mm-hmm.
So Bran thinks that his visions will eventually rob him of his ability to speak, but yeah, it is Hodor who loses almost all of his language as a consequence of Bran's power. So again, I think George is setting that up, that question of who's going to bear the sacrifice, who's going to bear the cost for Bran. Bran, you think you're losing your language, but Hodor is going to lose all words but one, thanks to you. And I just think of that wonderfully spooky line from Jojen in Dance, when Bran is kind of getting afraid of what the children of the forest are doing with him, and Jojen says, he is not the one who needs to be afraid. It's like, yes, it's Bran. It's everyone around you who needs to be terrified right now.
Yeah, and I love that, because I've always thought that meant that Jojen was about to be turned to paste, but I think it's very clear that it's also representing the danger that it's posed to not just Jojen, but to Mira and to Summer, and of course to Hodor too, because that is something I think that George is going to explore in The Winds of Winter, is how Hodor became Hodor, how Walder, rather, is his actual true name, became Hodor. I think it's going to be pretty fraught experience in The Winds of Winter.
One final bit of foreshadowing and groundwork here is the missing swords that they take with them from the crypts that will crop up again in A Dance with Dragons, when Theon and Barbary go down and take note of the missing swords. And Theon wonders, could that be the source of the killings in the castle? Are there ghosts about? And I don't think there are literal ghosts of the Winter Kings about in Winterfell, but it does speak to that same sense of Winterfell is unquiet now. Things are awry. The castle will need to be fixed and set back to its rightful owners.
I was going to say, you know, it's one of those things you read in the moment and you think, okay, they're getting ready to go out into an uncertain situation in the wreckage of Winterfell, and then possibly out into the wild, taking the readily available swords, which probably wouldn't be in the armory at this point. I assume it was ransacked. So it just seems like a very practical move here, but then circling it back around in The Winds of Winter to have it be a piece of forensic evidence, and Barbary dusting on her own little noir story, trying to figure out what exactly happened at Winterfell so she can better play her cards right, whatever they may be. And, you know, of course, there's the fact that some people think those swords have some kind of metaphysical property or magical property, keeping some sort of souls or keeping the dead in their place. You know, iron is supposed to have some sort of mythic quality, so to speak, but I don't know if that part will actually come through. I know season 8 of Game of Thrones had the dead literally rising in those crypts. And there is a line earlier in this Bran chapter where he notes that when the shadows moved, it looked like the dead rising when they were in the middle of the crypt. So that could be more foreshadowing for something like that. But I think the key part of this is definitely the forensic evidence and the great Northern conspiracy and where Barbary Dustin's going to fit into all this. She needed this piece to do whatever the next part of her plan is, I think.
And I think, you know, there's a part of the GNC which I think is actually true, is that Barbary Dustin goes down to investigate the crypts simply because she's trying to confirm what Wyman Manderly has told her about the Stark boys being alive. Because the idea being that Wyman Manderly is consulting with his fellow Northern lords and ladies and attempting to bring about the downfall of the Boltons, and he's trying to get Barbary Dustin on his side, but he needs her. But she needs the actual evidence to that these boys are alive. For me, like I just remember, I'm from playing Skyrim. You know, if you take like a sword from like a crypt, a ghost appears and you have to fight the ghost. So I could see that being not obvious inspiration for George, since that game was released in 2011. This book came out in 1998, but it is something that interplays with fancy tropes altogether.
Yeah, I like how it serves a couple different roles. It serves the nice role of Bran, symbolizing Bran's maturity and adulthood in this chapter, and then it plays into the kind of paranoia and intrigue when you get to A Dance with Dragons, where it feels like who's killing everyone. It feels like the castle itself is against us, and the very stones, as Theon thinks in Clash, are rising up against us. So George is just wringing that dry. You can tell how much he enjoys getting back to Winterfell and Dance, how much he enjoys writing this setting again. I love those chapters for that reason. So speaking of returns to Winterfell later in the books, moving on to our theory and discussion portion of the episode. As you both were saying earlier, Bran is kind of the last Stark to set out on his hero's journey from the womb of Winterfell, as so many of his family left in Book 1. So that opens up the question, obviously, of how and when do we think Bran returns to Winterfell in the books? He returned over the course of the season 6 and 7 in the show, but how do we think it's going to go down in the book specifically? What do you think, Manu?
Probably sooner than I thought after seeing season 8, because I definitely thought there was a chance that Bran never left the cave, or at least a portion of the pie chart said he might have stayed up north for the entirety of the story. But I'm truly down with King Bran of Westeros, perhaps with the sprinkling of ruling from the God's Eye thrown in there. But I do think, looking back at the book chapters, I can see that logical progression to King Bran. So I'm all on board with that. And so I do think he's southern bound in some sense in the long run. As for the when, I still think the wall falls near the end of the Winds of Winter. I just feel like there's other stuff that needs to happen first. And Bran likely makes it to Winterfell, or at least south of the wall, before that happens. Because I can see that kind of being something that prevents passage south in some way, whether it's the others blocking him or something like that. And I do expect that Winterfell is where winter will fall. As you guys have said, I think a big battle will happen there. And I think Bran's presence will be more than just through a tree or through the eyes of a raven. I think he will be there in some fashion. The how is where my footing is a little less sure. All I can say is I do think Mira will make it there with him, whether as his escort, as in the show, or some or other force helping both the Eagles coming and picking them up and carrying them back. Bran's relationship with the Reeds is super important. And if one of my pet theories comes true, it could be the center of tragedy. Because I do think the others will make it past Winterfell, and Bran may have to literally break the neck, so to speak, to the others advance to the southern kingdoms. Something similar to what the children did to the Arm of Dorne to sever Essos and Westeros when the first men were first coming. This would, of course, require sacrificing Greywater Watch and the land of the Reeds, but also maybe a physical manifestation of how the North actually separates from the Southern kingdoms to set up those two separate monarchs we did see in the show. So I think because of all that, I think assuming Jojen dies in the cave up north, I think Mira will be someone who tags along with Bran for a big chunk of it. And I do like the fact that she could be, that heroic knight that fights Bran, back home and all that. So that's kind of where I'm landing on the how, but I would not say I'm confident in that.
I like that because it's creating actual boundaries for the North and the South. If you break what Westeros and Essos were broken by the Arm of Dorne being broken, and breaking the neck allows for the North to exist as an independent kingdom with an actual physical boundary to the south, to Westeros and the Six Kingdoms as a whole. I think George has stated that Hold the Door will occur in the books as well, but he said it would be in a very different context than the one we saw in season 6 of the show. And something that stood out to me in rereading this chapter is that Bran and company voluntarily leave the safety of the darkness of the crypts to emerge into the light. So what I wonder is whether Bran will leave the safety of Bloodraven's cave, that an attack by the others / Whites won't be the triggering event for Bran, Mira, and Summer to leave Bloodraven's cave. And I do imagine Bloodraven will die, much as Jojen will die, or my thinking is already paced. And the mentor figures have to pass on for the protagonists to proceed forward into their hero's journey. So I can imagine a scenario where Bloodraven and Jojen are dead, and Bran voluntarily decides to leave the cave because his destiny is to save Westeros. As to how, your excellent question. It's a great one. I can provide a potential answer here. And let me introduce you to something we've referenced before, but it's the grand interconnected caves of Westeros theory. Yes, you heard it here, probably not first. In A Storm of Swords, Ygritte will tell Jon about Gorn's Way, which is a mythical cave that passes beneath the wall. In A Dance with Dragons, Bran's skin changes Hodor and finds that the cave system is dense, with Leaf, the child of the forest, telling Bran, men should not go wandering in this place. The river you hear is swift and black and flows down and down into a sunless sea. And there are passages that go even deeper, bottomless pits and sudden shafts, forgotten ways that lead to the very center of the earth. Even my people have not explored them all. We have lived here for 1,000 of your man years. So, what I'm imagining is that Bran goes through the caves deep in the earth and finds Gorn's Way and comes out on the other side of the wall and makes it back to Winterfell, which itself might be connected to the caves via the crypts. Remember, there's that whole thing about the layers of the crypts going deeper and deeper and deeper that are unexplored at this point in the story. And then Bran helps lead the defense of Winterfell from the astral plane, defeats the others in some sort of spiritual context. I don't know how it's going to unfold ultimately, but I think that's, to me, reads like the way that Bran returns to Winterfell. What say you, Emmett?
I love that idea. I've always loved that idea of Bran using the tunnels to return to Winterfell, because in the show they explained this via Uncle Benjen showing up, but Bran barely made it overland to Bloodraven's cave in the first place. And that was with Cold Hands, the help of Cold Hands. If Cold Hands and Bloodraven and all their other mystical helpers are dead, there's no way Bran and Mira are making it back over land, just in terms of just exposure. So making it, underground, that's still fantastical and unrealistic in its own way. But you can fudge the plausibility of it a bit more. It links into what Ygritte was saying. It links into how the crypts are described as going forever deep. It's the same way the black cells in the Red Keep are described as there's always another layer below. And we see Tyrion being brought through those cells in A Storm of Swords. And I wonder if that was kind of George's dry run for what he's going to do with Bran, like a whole chapter maybe down in the darkness, or part of a chapter down in the darkness where it's just Bran describing how it feels down there and trusting his third eye, getting them through. And then suddenly he recognizes a stone face in the distance. That could be so good. It would also be great if there's struggle in Winterfell or political strife, or people are worried about the others, and then Bran just suddenly just emerges in their midst, like the Stark they've been looking for this whole time. How could King Bran be a thing? I think kind of dramatic stage moments like that might be the sort of thing that makes it possible. And I also really love what Manu was talking about, that he might have to use his magic to prevent the others from getting south, which would also, again, bolster the possibility of a King Bran. That might be how he ends up, as the South is grateful or just kind of awed by the presence of this figure who saved them all from apocalypse. But in the process, he is to literally cut off his homeland from his new kingdom, which, that's very bittersweet. And then would set up why an independent North still makes sense, because now there's just a giant moat. So, okay, you're literally different continents now. Okay, so independence making a bit more sense. So I think that all comes together. And I was like Manu, I used to think that Bran wasn't coming home. He was going to direct things from the top of the world. But I think if you really look at the kind of the mythic structure of a chapter like this, and the way Bran is tied to life and death and rebirth, that makes the circle has to close. You know what I mean? He has to come home and make good.
Yeah, I think his powers, technically, you could have him rule from anywhere if you really wanted to. But I think George has emphasized ruling as part of being not being disconnected. And I think Bran ruling as some kind of mystical presence hovering over the actual body politic doesn't make as much sense as Bran being somewhat more physically connected into everything.
I love all of those thoughts, and I think I think ultimately the story is calling Bran to come home. I think Jojen says it really well about the Starks returning to Winterfell at the end of the story, and I think that would make for a part of the sweet part of the bittersweet ending that George has said that A Song of Ice and Fire is going to end on. So I love it. I think it's fantastic thinking that Bran is going to be returning to Winterfell, and I think it leads us as readers to a place where we can feel good. We can feel emotions. We can feel the emotions that we felt at the end of this chapter with Bran leaving. Him returning to Winterfell will likely evoke similar bittersweet yet hopeful feelings about the state of the world and about these characters that we all love so much. And I think that's terrific. It's wonderful. But I think that's going to wrap us up for this analysis on A Clash of Kings Bran 7. As always, thank you so much to everyone for listening, and thanks especially to Manu for joining us. I just put this note in at the very end, but plug your shit. Tell us where we can find you and on Twitter and your podcast and all the stuff that you're doing these days.
I'm Manu, also known as Manuclear Bomb. I'm currently breaking down the Metal Gear Solid franchise on Podcast Sans Frontieres, something I think Nauticast fans will really enjoy if Metal Gear is up their alley. Thanks again for inviting me on. And more importantly, congratulations on wrapping up A Clash of Kings. And thank you for 3 years of excellent coverage. You two are very near and dear to the hearts of everyone in this community, and we appreciate you without end. May the gods watch over you into storm and onwards. Thank you, guys.
That's real sweet, buddy. Thank you so much for saying that. That was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much, man. It's a pleasure always having you on. You let us know when you want to come back for a Storm of Swords episode. We would love to have you as many times as you'd like to come on. So yeah, you're a wonderful friend to us, and you mean a lot to both of us. And yeah, it's good stuff. Okay, so as always, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, SoundCloud, Podbean, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere and everywhere where you find our podcasts.
You can check out our Patreon at patreon.com/NauticastASOIAF. You can follow us on Twitter at NauticastASOIAF or shoot us an email at NauticastASOIAF@gmail.com. You can find me at Port Quentin on Twitter or at PortQuentin.com.
And you can find me at Brendan Beefish on Twitter, Brendan Beefish on Reddit, and my website is warsandpoliticsofIceandfire.wordpress.com.
We want to shout out and thank our high lords and ladies on Patreon. Red Ralu himself, who has renounced his allegiance to the Squishers. Lady of 1,000 Words. Septon Marybald, the Shoeless Sage. Sister Winter, Lady of the Wolfswood. Nessie the Elusive, Warden of the Neck, Defender of the North, and Keeper of Secrets. Sir Thomas the Raven Knight, Lord of Blackwood. Sir Way of Course. Matt, Warden of the Sanguine Shore. Lord Sam K. Wisdom Benjicott, Alchemist of Sets and Quanta, Mage of the Arts of Boolin de Morgan. Tibbs the Great of House Catnapping. Lord J. Manderley, Baker of the Frey Pies. Septon Merriful Heffair. Lady Silverwing. Kaboth the Unfrozen, Lord of the Bricks and Castle Crimson Light. Sir Keith of House Corbray, wielder of Lady Forlorn. Lord Andrew, Warden of the Dubai Sands. Lord Young of the Ghost Woods. Lady Mira Reed, wielder of Dark Sister, Slayer of Tinfoil. Sir Will of the Anarcho-Syndicalist Commune. Lord Clay, Sir Small Paul, Guardian of the Stonehaven, Defender of Donatar Castle. Septon T-Bone, Refined Wrangler of Icy Arachnids. Lady Veronica, who was abandoned the orphans at the end of the Crossroads to become the Queen of Memes. Lady Danielle of House Lannister, Titanium Pirate. Lady Joan, Lady Ranger of the Frostfangs. Lady Amy Blackfire, Analyzer of Chinese Literature and Dismantler of the Patriarchy. Sydney of House Quo, Princess of the Friendly Black Hotties in the Summer Isles. Random, Fierce Protector of Cripples, Bastards, and Broken Things. Sir, Lady, Jordan, Defender of the God's Eye. Lord Peter, not Peter, Drinker of Strong Wine and Lord Commander of the Flat Planetos Society. Thank you so much, as always, to our high lords and ladies.
Absolutely. Thank you, folks, so very, very much for your support. It means the world to us. So thank you. So join us next time in a few months' time for A Storm of Swords, the prologue from the perspective of Chet. He's a great guy.
Skip,
fucking
something like that.
I don't know.
Some name like Todd, some name like that.
And we'll be joined by a special guest. Oh, that would be a spoiler. We'll let you hang on that one, chew on that one for a little bit. Who's going to be our special guest for that episode? So I hope you guys stick around. Emmett's got lots of great stuff planned in the coming months. And I am dearly indebted to all of you for sticking with us and listening to us, watching us on live streams. But more than anything, I'm indebted to Emmett for his friendship and for his love. And I dearly appreciate him. And I know that you guys all do too. So thank you to him. Thank you to all of you for listening. Thank you to our patrons. And we'll see you next time for a Storm of Swords prologue.
All right, I've stopped recording.
Same.
Whew.
Beautiful. Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you,
That's
everyone,
awesome.
for watching. Thanks again, Manu, for being here. Bryn didn't buy fish. You're going to make me cry. I didn't even notice you.
Yeah,
changed
that was quite emotional.
How dare you, sir?
Well, I had to do it at the middle, at the like in the middle of the episode. I'm like, oh, wait a minute, I've got the Brendan B fish. I had inspiration from Manu, who I remember you have the amazing ability to change your Manu name to something topical, and so I was
That's
like,
true.
oh, wait, I've got my name too. I could change it to something topical as well. Saying bye to everyone for a little while. So yeah,
Your only topic is sadness. It's appropriate. I approve.
it is appropriate. Man, how are you feeling? We're at the end of a Clash of Kings, Emmett. How do you feel at the end of this grand book? We started 2019. Can you believe that?
I know, that's wild. You're like saying it's been so long since we did a Bran chapter. It's good. I feel complete, and now I feel like I never need to look at Clash of Kings ever again. Not ever again, but I feel like it's just like we did it to a T, and now we can just like I can just like throw it in like a grinder, like a what's the machine I'm thinking of? A shredder. Like I'm throwing Clash of Kings in just like a mental shredder, and then like a Storm of Swords can arrive like a newborn with like a halo above it.
That's right. We can burn one book, open the next book. When we're done that one, we burn that one. It's like Bruce Bolton at Harrenhal, right? When he burns, he finishes reading the book.
That's what I'm talking about. Bruce Bolton at Harrenhal going, "Foosh." That's my mood right now. The fires reflect in my eyes. Mood. How are you feeling about it, Jeff? How do you feel about Clash of Kings?
It's weird. It's a weird feeling like coming to the end of it because I feel like I've just enjoyed a great full meal.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I'm like, wow, that was a great meal. That was awesome. I wish I could have that meal all over again. Let's just start a Clash of Kings when we pick back up in August. We'll just start the prologue all over again. Right? Are you cool with that? No,
exactly.
I know.
Go right back around. Works for me.
Oh man, I remember early on, I think it was one of the Catelyn chapters in A Clash of Kings, like 2 or 3. I can't remember, but I remember just tweeting out after listening to that episode is like, I think I'm going to become a Clash of Kings as my favorite book guy. I mean, I don't really believe it, but
Clash
just
of
sitting
Kings
there.
fan.
Yeah, I mean, and especially the way you guys covered it. But I think the last time I reread it about a year ago, and especially the Catelyn chapters popped with me a lot more this time. I think you guys have. I was never like an anti-Catelyn person because we know those people exist or whatever, but I think you guys really sharpened my eye. I probably started with Catelyn 5 in A Game of Thrones with that Tyrion Crossroads episode, which Girls Gone Canon just covered beautifully just a week ago.
It did so well with that. Yeah, I love
but
that.
I feel like there was like a certain leveling up of my love of Catelyn for that. And then when I went through A Clash of Kings again, I'm just like, my God, like to have all that Stannis and Renly stuff, that Marjorie stuff in the beginning, and then to end with that Jaime stuff. Like,
there's so much covered there. It's great.
Yeah. And I think, you guys help elevate the material just generally, just the amount of work and effort you guys put into it. Just, it makes you want to love it more because of all the things you pull out of it. So we appreciate that.
Thank you, sir. Well, thank you so much.
Man. Yeah, it's wonderful. I mean, it's a great book. I might be the Clash of Kings is a better book than A Storm of Swords for the moment, but my perspective could change when we get deep into A Storm of Swords because those, it's like I felt at the end of A Game of Thrones. Like there were some slow chapters in A Game of Thrones, kind of like those middle Tyrion Catelyn chapters after Catelyn 5. But then at the end of the book, it's just like the pacing ramps up and like the plot is just very like fast and heavy. And I felt like really into A Game of Thrones at the end of that. And like it's sort of a similar dynamic for A Clash of Kings, where like those early Arya chapters are kind of a slog a little bit, and like the plot is like just kind of resuming itself. And by the time you get to the end of A Clash of Kings, you're like just flipping the pages. Like I remember reading Catelyn's 7. That was her final chapter. And I finished that chapter, went to the next chapter. I think I read the rest of the book like in a single setting. It was like 4 hours of reading at one time. So.
Yeah, I was the opposite. I'm pretty sure I stopped. I think I read the Catelyn chapter and I'm like, fuck. Okay, let me see the next one. It's the Arya chapter. Like, fuck. Okay, I'm going to take a break for the rest of the night. Go pour myself a whiskey. But I like it. Part of me also kind of likes the boring shit. Just like when you're at the real beginning of Storm, you're just like, you're in the middle of A Song of Ice and Fire, It's just like a lot of great stuff has happened, a lot of great stuff to come. So I kind of like wallowing in those Bran chapters before he reaches the Night Fort. and obviously the Queen's Crown is a big set piece and all that, but sometimes I like, just a little bit of wallowing, because once you hit the Red Wedding, then it's event after event after event,
absolutely.
So it's great. I like it a lot, but
That's awesome. Yeah. These are great books. I mean, we're still talking about them in 2021. This book was written in 1998, and Storm of Swords is written in the year 2000. It's awesome. I enjoy it. I enjoy it immensely. And I'll miss this book, but into the fire it goes. Onto a Storm of Swords.
Sacrifice it to R'hllor like the leeches. The usurper, Clash of Kings, the usurper, Storm of Swords.
Yeah. Really sucks for me because I always have to throw an iPad into the fire every time we finish a book here. So it just
it's gonna get expensive for you. You're gonna rack up a lot of iPads here.
No wonder.
That's
shit.
Please help me budget this. My family is dying.
I love that meme. All right, but Manu, if you're interested, we usually do like a little Q&A after the episode for folks who have any questions on stuff, Song of Ice and Fire, pop culture related. I know you've got plenty of takes on everything. The best takes, the only takes worth giving.
It's my job.
Damn right.
Luke,
yep. I'll stick around, absolutely.
Luke Lord of Loneleaf says Jeff has to return his Audible book. Yeah, that actually is true. I just deleted A Clash of Kings, the Audible book, right when I finished Bran 7.
That with the old Circle of Life.
That's right. Downloaded A Storm of Swords, and so yeah. I mean, I've been reading a fair number of Storm of Swords chapters, like the early chapters, like for John's especially, because John A stops. And then I was like, okay, you got to find out the Mance Raider stuff. So yeah. Okay, Guilty Undertaker asks, will you still be covering Fever Dream in Jeff's absence? Can we get a podcast where Emmett just monologues about movies?
We'll be waiting on Fever Dream till Jeff comes back, which will be what a shame because we're getting to some really exciting parts of that book, but that'll be a blast. And yeah, I was going to do some stuff about movies while Jeff is gone, probably. I was thinking of writing or doing some episodes on my own about it. We'll see how it goes. I'm going to be playing it by ear, but every week there's going to be fresh new stuff, multiple stuff. So look forward to it.
Do you want to reveal who's going to be your first guest?
Oh, yeah. So for my first guest is going to be Clint from the Learned Hands podcast, who we've had on before for a wonderful guest episode with Tyrion early in class. So that's going to be this will be out for everyone. This episode will be out for everyone a week from today. And then my episode with Clint will be out for at least patrons and possibly everyone a week after that.
I was going to say, I know you love talking movies, and I think I found one to talk about with you at some point, Emmett. I think we need to talk about the only 4 movies that M. Night Shyamalan has made. Sixth Sense, Unbreakable, Signs, and The Village. Maybe just The Village, but I still have a high opinion of my boy because I have not seen a single one of his movies since The Village. So 4 for 4, and I know nothing else about it, but that'd be a fun one to talk about.
There.
Did you see like the Glass movies, like that part of that? Have you seen that one at all? Or
Unbreakable?
Yeah, Unbreakable is just a masterpiece of a movie.
I've seen the good Shyamalan movies and the bad Shyamalan movies, and I've just as much to say about both. Even his bad ones, I could talk about endlessly. So
you could talk about Lady in the Water.
Yeah, Lady in the Water is amazing. That movie got made because he himself plays the all-time messianic writer-director whose words are going to save the world, which is like, that's usually the thing indie directors get away with doing, not a guy with that kind of budget level. So that's amazing.
Yeah.
Joe the Magician asks, The Happening, ?
The Happening is also just a great kooky premise where the wind is chasing you. I have a soft spot for it, I have to admit.
It definitely happened. That's like I can say that about that movie. But
it's true. No, I'm with Manu. That quartet, especially The Village. I love The Village, but Sixth Sense, Unbreakable, even Signs, all very good.
I took one film class in undergrad, and I did a paper on Signs, and I got an A+ wow on it. So I hold that movie just for academic purposes. I consider it one of the greatest. So,
damn right.
Yeah, I mean, Signs is great. I just find The Village is just his actual masterpiece. It's his not unloved, because people who have great tastes love the movie, but at the time,
and sophistication and nuance.
It wasn't like panned by like critics, but it was like.
Hold on a second. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I gotta save my lights from the cats. Keep going. Give me a sec.
Oh, yep. I mean, it's just, I mean, the soundtrack alone, I know you and I, Manu, have talked about the brilliance of the, is it James Newton soundtrack that he did that?
I don't remember at this point, but yeah, it's definitely a gripping score. It's really tense, but it also has those like flourishes that are really great. And one part I love the romance between Bryce Dallas Howard and Joaquin Phoenix in that movie.
Yes.
It's one of the better realized romances, I feel like. I don't know. I just so many good things to say about it. It's like a lot of times with those Shyamalan movies, I don't even care what the twist is, or like that is so inconsequential to what I'm extracting from the movie. It's more just how it is as a tonal piece or a thematic piece or whatever.
Yeah, The Village is just a masterpiece. So love that. I love that you have your cat over your right shoulder now, Emmett. That's
well,
great.
yeah, they had to. They were clamoring to be out. But yeah, maybe I'll do a piece about The Village while you're gone, Jeff. I'll do a whole thing about it.
I would love to listen to that. Absolutely
Good.
I was just going to say, I've been trying to get my cats to show up, but they're both just passed out, like on the other side of the monitor, like a table over. They're like taunting me with their not coming on the camera. But I saw a question for me in the chat. Can I just go ahead? And it wasn't really tagged or anything, but I think Aaron asked what Chicago restaurant am I excited to go eat at after this? Yeah. I think it's my second favorite burger in the city at Owen and Engine, but it's right across the street from a movie theater, and it's a British pub with a lot of great I know Jeff will love this, IPAs, because I assume that's all he drinks. But it's been a bread and butter movie and restaurant kind of place, and one of the places that I've just missed a lot. They do a great burger with an egg on it. And it's just, I have positive associations with that. It is like an award-winning burger, and like, you know, whatever restaurant awards they give out, it has its fair share. But that's probably the one I'm most looking forward to, because it's always just a positive experience for me.
That's great. That sounds tasty.
Yeah. Yeah, my wife and I, we both got our vaccination, which is awesome and great. And we went out to a restaurant this past weekend. It was just lovely. It was weird to like be in a public setting, you know, not just sitting around the house all day or going to work or whatnot. But it's great. So I look forward to you eagerly recounting your first forays out into the wild, so to speak. Tyler asks, have you guys read any of George's other works aside from Fever Dream? If so, thoughts? Yeah. My favorite George book is actually, besides A Song of Ice and Fire or A Dance with Dragons, is not actually Fever Dream, as his work outside of A Song of Ice and Fire. It's actually his book called Dying of the Light, which I think is just a epically sad story. We talked about this in our prologue recounting. We did that episode on Patreon, but the idea of it is that there's the sun is dying for this one world, but like Manu was talking about earlier with M. Night Shyamalan, with M. Night's movies, the point isn't like the plot mechanics of like how these things unfold. It's the deep melancholy that the main character Dirk Tallarian feels about the loss of his love Gwen, when she sends him a message asking him to come forward and come back to her. A lot of this I think is really good because it was written in 1977. It was written as George was going through the divorce with his first wife, Gail. I'm gonna forget her name, unfortunately. But it's very melancholy. It's really, really good work that George does in writing characters. George was awesome at writing characters in the 70s, and that continues good work through the 2020s, so to speak. How about you guys? Have you guys read any of George's other works?
I've read a bunch of his shorter stories. I really like Sand Kings, the one short story of his about a guy who acquires this insect population that he essentially forces into massive gladiator tournaments with each other. And then, you know, inevitably they turn on him. That has one of the greatest and spookiest endings to any short story I've ever read. So I highly recommend Sand Kings for anyone who hasn't read that.
Nothing from me, unless you want to count Blackwater, The Lion and the Rose, The Bear and the Maiden.
His work.
Bear. Yeah, no, everything I've read of George has generally been tied back to Westeros and A Song of Ice and Fire in some way, but not for any reason. It's just there's lots of things to read, and I just haven't read those yet.
Have you? So there's a YouTube video which is really funny. It's George's audio commentary for the episodes that he wrote. So he did for the Pointy End, for Blackwater, for the Bear and the Maiden Fair, and for the Lion and the Rose. He did audio commentary for each of those episodes. And it's this guy, guy or girl, whoever it was, captured every time that George says in the books, and it's like 90, 120 times of George saying in the book, and the books, 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 and the books. It's just a way that George. That's how George does his audio commentary. I think it's endearing for George. But yeah, everybody's saying don't read Meat House Man, which I know that our friend Joe the Magician has done a YouTube video on. And yeah, I concur with everyone's sentiments not to read that book. Most of his other stuff's really good, though. The Way of Cross and Dragon is one that I want to read, but I haven't gotten around to reading it yet. But that's one of the stories I'd like to read. Probably it's going to be next on my list. But yeah, all right. Let's see here. Samir asks, whose Song of Ice and Fire point of view would you give Hideo Kojima to make into a game? Question mark.
Oh, what do you think, Manu?
Oh, okay. My first answer will be a little bit of a cheat while I think about it more. But if you break the point of view, like if you just take any character from Westeros, I really like the idea of Beric Dondarrion being that point of view. I talked with Emmett when I was on with him a little bit ago about how the Militaris Sans Fronteras is basically the Brotherhood without banners. It's very similar, kind of a haven for soldiers, an outer haven, if you will. So I really do like Beric Dondarrion. He's even eye patched like Big Boss, so you got the physical similarities there. But I think that's a good character for someone who struggles with his martial order, or not struggles, but you have the martial orders versus his actual desire to do good, and kind of balancing that out within a martial system or a sword or a system where might often makes right, or at least wins the day. So I think Beric Dondarrion would be the character. In terms of point of view, I mean, I think Theon would make a great punished snake, or someone who really got fucked up bad. Sure. And then if you combine Theon with a little bit of like Lady Stoneheart, I guess you can have a really good, interesting thing where you take the Theon character's trauma, give him a little bit of that Stoneheart. He survived and is fucking shit up now. I think those are probably my two bets, but that's definitely a question I'll have to ponder some more.
Yeah, I don't play video games anymore, unfortunately. So I couldn't even answer the question.
I like that a lot. It's obviously there's that paranoid modern technology aspect that doesn't fit into ASWAF, but that fractured, sad life of a soldier trying to reconstruct your memory. I think Beric could fit. Beric kind of glitches in the way that Metal Gear Solid characters, kind of mentally glitch out a lot. So I think that's a great choice.
Love it. All right. Our friend San Rixine, aka Mallory, the great artist, says, I want to know Emmett's most hated film. Okay, I'm gonna clarify this. I'm gonna clarify this question, because it's not gonna be like a movie that's actually bad, but a movie that's generally liked. That's your most hated film.
Oh, okay.
Or popular, right? Liked, critically admired,
right.
Or popular.
I'm just trying to think of a good example. What do people like? I don't keep track of such things.
Okay, Micah suggests Bright, the Netflix movie that came out a few years ago.
I mean, anything that fucking loser Max Landis touches is that's such an obvious target. That guy, like, it's easy to be smug about, like, oh, I saw that guy coming, but like 10 seconds of an interview with that guy, it's like, how many red flags can one man possibly put up?
Just throw out there, just throw red flags.
Yeah, that dude is all red flags, of course, because his dad is, is John Landis, murdered people on his movie set, so doesn't fall far from the tree. Anyway, come back to me. I'll think of an example for that. I promise, so, Mallory. I'll think of a good one.
Yeah, Manu. Yeah,
I was gonna say, do we get to guess what Emmett's most hated film is, or do we have to take it for ourselves?
Either way, all of the above.
No. I guess you said so I guess it can't be The Rise of Skywalker, because it's not so much that movie's bad, because there's other bad. I think it's just very cynical is what I would say about it. I think a movie that I don't think it was like greatly loved, but people generally liked was Jurassic World. And I found that to be like the blandest directed movie in my life, where like shots were framed where you knew exactly where the dinosaurs would enter in or where the characters would escape. Like it gave away too much of the game. It was just very boringly shot. So it took away all the tension for me. So that's about as close as I can get. But I famously like movies. My problem is that I like things like I find something in a movie and I seize onto it. I think of things that are now kind of reevaluated as bad, like let's say American Beauty, which I don't think is a great movie, but I think it's such a perfect capture of that moment in time, or at least where art was. So it's like, it's not a great movie, but I can at least look at that and say, I can pull something out of watching this movie. But maybe that's an answer for what's, I don't like that movie and it won an Oscar. So I guess that could be it.
There's the movie Funny Games, the horror movie. It's a French horror movie that got remade as an American movie that is really well done for its concept. I just hate what it's trying to do. So if you haven't seen it, the idea of Funny Games, it's a slasher, it's a home invasion movie where the killers, or at least one of the killers, is aware he's in a movie. So he will at various points like wink to the camera or rewind things so the heroes can't get away, or blame you for watching it. And yeah, if you're rolling your eyes at the concept, it plays out exactly how that sounds, where it's just the director thinks he's so much better than slasher movies. And anyone who watches them is so depraved. And I just think that's such an antiquated mindset. And then to make a whole movie about that concept, I think is just like such an astonishing. And the director, Michael Haneke, has made some great movies. He made a movie, Cachet, that was really, really good. Like 15 years ago, he made The Piano Teacher, The White Ribbon, movies a lot of people like, Amour, which I think won a couple Oscars. But this is one of his early movies, and it's just so on the nose. And I like slasher movies a lot, and I think slasher movies work great as an empathy machine. Like if you're watching a slasher movie, oh look, it's Jake, and you feel like you can't watch anymore. What that is empathy. You're projecting yourself into the victims, and that's a powerful thing to witness into. Like a movie that says, "Oh, you're just a depraved sleazeball for watching that." Like that kind of stuff pisses me off. Movies that like think they're better than the genre they're in. That annoys me. As does Jake. Jake also annoys me.
I've got one for you, Emmett. You talked about this before. Slumdog Millionaire.
Oh, well. I don't know if I'm even qualified to talk. That one just seemed like such a grift. I don't know. that one seemed like if you just look at the name of the list of names of people making that movie, I'm like, okay.
I look very askance at that whole film thing.
Yeah.
I'm glad that it introduced a lot of people to Dev Patel. That was definitely something great to come out of that. But it was definitely, I don't think it's like the worst thing I've ever seen or anything like that, but it's definitely a white lens on a lot of Indian culture without a lot of the context or South Asian culture. And I don't mind that it actually spoke to the violence that Hindus invoke on Muslims, because that is a real problem. So that part is good, but I think a lot of the other aspects of the culture were heavily caricaturized. It just landed flat. And Danny Boyle's all right. I enjoy Trainspotting well enough, and some of his other work. So
we like Sunshine here on the Nauticast. He's got some good ones, but yeah, that one seemed like it was ill-advised.
Yeah. I have not seen that since it first came out back in the 2008. So I imagine my take on it would be different.
That was so long ago.
Wasn't it? I mean,
I just feel like a Muzak version of Yesterday by the Beatles playing in my head as I sit still quietly, taking my aging.
Slumdog Millionaire was a movie we saw. I don't know.
Exactly.
All right. Frank asks, what do we think George R. R. Martin will have be the coolest manifestation of Bran's powers? How would you manifest his powers to maximize said coolness?
It's a fun question. I mean, George is he's wary about going all in with just pure magic awesomeness. He doesn't do that much.
Yeah, I think
spurts, bits and pieces.
I was going to say, the best I got is the theory I hit you in the episode. I think there's a chance that Bran causes a cataclysmic continental level. Like, I think that would be the peak of his powers. If you think he's controlling animals, then humans, and then eventually if it goes to the point where he's literally moving the earth itself. And I know we don't like to buy into God Emperor Bran too far, or make sure that I saw someone in the comments when I was talking about that saying, if Bran severs the north from the south, does that cut him off from the werewood network? And that could be a way to rein back in Bran's powers after a lot of the long night stuff. So he isn't a God Emperor. He's, a petty God Emperor as opposed to the God Emperor, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that could be a way that George would have Bran maximizing his power. And I could see that being a sad moment for Bran because he has to sever himself from the werewood network. He has to make a sacrifice. He has to sacrifice his magical abilities to gain the safety of the world, to prevent the slaughter of innocents south of the neck. I could see that being something that's personally painful for Bran. It might actually affect him physically. It might be actually painful for him to do that. So I'll be curious to see what George has in mind for Bran. Again, he's one of the hardest characters for George to write. I mean, when we get to A Storm of Swords, he's got 4 chapters in A Storm of Swords, among the biggest book that George wrote. He's got 3 chapters in A Dance with Dragons, so he's only written 7 chapters between 1998 and 2011. So I'm curious to see what George will do with Bran. We do know that there's one additional chapter that he cut from A Dance with Dragons at the last minute. So we'll see what happens with that in the long term for Bran. But I'm curious to see how his powers manifest as the series goes on. Caitlin asks, how are they going to fix the Horn of Winter?
Right, so they got that horn that Jon and Sam found north of the wall that is cracked. Well, there are the high towers. Sam is going to Old Town, and the high towers are rumored to be up in the tower messing with magical artifacts and such. Sam, is Sam, they're all related, the Reach families. Is Sam related to the high towers somehow? Is he somehow a cousin? Even if he's not, I think it wouldn't be that hard for Sam to talk to the high towers because he's a nobleman from the Reach. So if the horn has to be fixed somehow, if that's part of George's plan, I could easily see them doing that, or someone else in Old Town. Old Town's full of people who like to do stuff like fix magical horns. If you're going to go to some place in Westeros to do that kind of thing, that's where you go. It'd be nice if Marwyn the Mage had stuck around longer than 15 seconds. I think it's hilarious in Feast that Sam, we've been hearing about Marwyn this whole time. Sam shows up. Marwyn says 10 hilariously tantalizing, incomplete, cryptic things, and then walks right the fuck back out of the book again. It's just like the least helpful mentor in the history of time. That's just wonderful. But anyway, Old Town is still full of people who could do something like that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, nothing really to add to that. I think the horn will have to be reforged in the same way that Aragorn's sword has to be reforged. But of course, it's going to be a much darker thing, because I imagine a scenario where Sam presents the Horn of Winter to the High Towers, and then they're like, we will take care of that. Thank you, sir. We will use this. We will only use this at our deepest, darkest need, our direst hour. And then, of course, Euron rolls right in and takes Old Town, burns it, takes the horn, and then blows it there after they've reforged it. So, yeah, it'll be good stuff.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. Did they say, is it like cleaved in half like it's shown in the show? Or maybe I'm thinking of Boromir's horn now that I think about it. But
right, it's all one horn. Something like that.
Cracked. It's cracked, yeah.
Okay, so, maybe just some rubber band, or maybe if you still blow on it, or if you blow on it now, it'll have some kind of like monkey paw effect, or, where it doesn't work quite right. Half the wall comes down. I don't know. But again, if it falls into Euron's possession prior to its mending, Euron definitely has tricks up his sleeve, or at least blood he's willing to spill to try and fix stuff. So maybe it's another one of Euron's crazy ceremonies or exhibitions or something like that.
One of Euron's wacky schemes.
So wacky. Interesting. Tyler brings up the idea. Who says it's broken? It just might need to be blown 3 times, which I think is an interesting idea.
That is always the signal. Yeah, you got to blow into it. You got to turn it off, turn it back on. The whole process.
Like, didn't work the first time, try it second time, didn't work the second time, but works the third time. Boom! It's like when the Joker has the triggering mechanism to blow up the hospital in the Dark Knight, like taps it, taps it, boom! I can see that being something we would see in the future. SKNC had a question I'm just trying to find. He asked, who's the most intelligent? Okay, here we go. Who is the most intelligent character in A Song of Ice and Fire?
Oh, geez. I guess I measure intelligence in terms of intimidation. I guess like who would I be like most sweating in a conversation with, trying to keep up with? That's a difficult question. What do you guys think?
Sometimes I like to, I think of intelligence as also having a moral component that we don't always think about it, because we tend to say like these awful dictators. I don't want to invoke Hitler or anything, but people say, oh, he was an intelligent man, this, that, or another. And I just, this is just my own bullshit. This isn't really anything academic, but I like to argue that our thinking of intelligence should have a moral component to that. So I don't know, Samuel Tarly, maybe he's book read, but he's also morally developed in a way that, like, I still go back to the whole thing with Gilly, and I can't steal her. She's not a goat. Like, that's just like such a bare acknowledgement of humanity that that's morally intelligent to me. And we also know Sam is otherwise intelligent as well. So I'll just throw it at his feet. Or that he will be if he reaches full adulthood and gets to read all the books that he wishes to keep reading.
I think it's a great answer. I can't come up with a better one than that, because I mean, like, what is it that Elsie Mormont says when Sam's the one who's like, actually, the blood is dried. These things have been dead for a while. Their eyes are blue. That's not right, because Arthur had brown eyes when he was little, green eyes. I can't remember what color his eyes were, but they're shining blue right now. So like, he has an obvious practical intelligence, but I think the moral component is something that's much more developed in Samuel Tarly than in the characters that people would normally say, like Tyrion or Tywin or Varys or Littlefinger, or any of these types of characters that people are like, oh, they're so smart. They just don't have necessarily the moral framework to intelligently operate ethically and morally. I think I got it there at the end.
No, I agree with both what you're saying. It's part of what we think about as intelligence is working through a situation with empathy and problem solving in terms of the other people in the room. And that comes to the fore with a character like Sam Tarly, or like Septon Merribold. Like, I wouldn't say Septon Merribold is an intellectually ambitious man, but I think he has made intelligent decisions in terms of what he's doing with his life and why. So even though Septon Merribold, you don't think of him like atop a tower with his quill and his books, but I would still think of him as a very intelligent person. And then there's characters with, I think, huge blind spots, but still have just clearly immense mental capacity, like Littlefinger. Like, obviously, we make fun of Littlefinger for his sleazy ridiculousness and the kind of the pettiness of his motives, but like, dude's got like an entire like continent-wide scheme he seems to carry around in his head all day, and just does. Like, that's impressive. Like, he from what Tyrion is able to find in Storm of Swords, Littlefinger has not directly written down what he's doing. He's hiding it in a lot of accounting tricks. Like, there's a reason Thomas Cromwell frightened everyone in England for a while there when he came up. Like, that kind of dude can wreak havoc on the nobility who are used to not doing counting or writing or any such things. Like, so Littlefinger is a easy target for a reason, but he's gotten as far as he is because he's a very smart dude, as is Varys along similar lines.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too. Those are all good points as well. Alan asked, would it be fair to say that Varys is more hypocritical than Littlefinger? At least Littlefinger does not lie that he fights for the greater good. Well, I think I would sort of dispute the idea that Littlefinger doesn't think he's fighting for the greater good, because I think in his mind, he's like, I'm finally sticking it to the nobility that stuck it to me. Like, that's obviously good, right? And I'm gaining back Catelyn in the form of Sansa, which was denied to me. So that's also a greater good. Just happens to be greater good for Littlefinger alone. But is Varys more hypocritical than Littlefinger, that he frames his actions as, for the greater good, and like killing Kevin Lannister at the end of A Dance with Dragons? I don't know. What do you guys think?
I don't know. Littlefinger, I mean, I think he defines himself as the greater good. So in a way that he is fighting for the greater good, but I feel like there's some conviction to Varys. Like I know he's being a puppeteer in his own strings, but I think he buys a little bit into his plot, or he thinks that he could have good outcomes result of what's happening. Obviously, there's like 5 years of war and short-term awfulness or whatever the thing will be. But for some reason, I just feel like there's some conviction to him. I don't know why I say that even. Maybe it's the fact that he's still lying about young Griff to the dying Kevin Lannister at the end, like acting like he's a real boy, not like giving any hints that he doesn't believe it. He's just a good mummer. He knows his part and he plays it well. So it's also like, 6 of one, half dozen of another. If you're comparing Littlefinger and Varys, it's going to be a matter of degree, not kind. So I don't think either of them is outside of the other's margin of error per se.
I totally agree with that. And yeah, I think ranking hypocrisy can start to become kind of abstract and pointless after a while. Like, they both clearly don't see the suffering of others as an impediment to their goals. I do think Varys's goals are more admirable. I think if you asked Littlefinger about the greater good, he would just be nonplussed. Like, I honestly don't think he's taking that into account, and maybe has never thought about that ever. Like when he goes back to the Vale and he's like meeting his peasants, he talks about them like they're just like amusing stray cats that come in sometimes. Like it's not even, he's not thinking about it at all. Whereas Varys has this, I think, kind of twisted conception of what the people really do. The philosopher king descending from on high with his scroll and his harp. I think that model has its own problems. But Littlefinger, for all the intricacies of his planning that I was saying, I don't know what Littlefinger, I don't know what kind of Westeros Littlefinger wants to wake up in. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I don't know if he's even thought that far beyond like my nice feather bed and the red-haired Stark Tully girl smiling at me in that bed. Like, I think that really might be it.
Yeah.
Which is just kind of petty, given all that intelligence. So that contrast is the Littlefinger dilemma, right?
Yeah.
He's the subtlety of his means and the cartoonishness of his ends.
Eliana brings up a really good point in the chat. She says the smartest character was Salladhor Saan, who saw the shit show that was happening, was like, I'm going home. Yeah.
True. Although that didn't stop him from showing up in the first place.
Right.
maybe as soon as he saw Dragonstone, he should have turned around and get go. But I totally agree. Salladhor piecing out, wise move.
Yeah, I think it's funny too. The moment that Salladhor Saan pieces out is the moment that Stannis gets his loans from the Iron Bank. So when Stannis can actually pay Salladhor Saan, he's gone.
What irony! Exactly.
Sabir says Salladhor sane. Okay, that's
Salladhor sane. I
like that.
All right, take a few more questions here this evening. If you gentlemen are up for it.
For me.
SKNC asks, how do you think A Song of Ice and Fire and Lord of the Rings compare in their treatment of the corruption caused by power?
Well, I think A Song of Ice and Fire takes place more in the real world than Lord of the Rings, but I think it's easy to give it too much credit in that regard. See, for example, King Bran at the end. Tolkien disliked Lord of the Rings being used as World War II allegory for a reason. It's very clearly a country of the imagination and nostalgia and things being changed from a distance. And The Song of Ice and Fire is supposed to be a little more visceral and a little more, I guess, kind of mud and grit in your face. But I think ultimately, both Lord of the Rings and A Song of Ice and Fire have say more psychologically than they do politically. Ultimately, maybe people disagree with me about that, but
no, I think you're right. I think that people bring up this idea of George always asking, what was Aragorn's tax policy? What was his policy dealing with the orcs after the end of Return of the King? And I think those are interesting questions, but I think George is much more. And I was talking about this in the Not a Slack earlier today for our two highest tier patrons. We have a daily discussion, and the thing we were talking about today is what the fuck are they talking about in terms of like fan analyses and theories. And my idea is that, and maybe it's not even my idea, I can't remember who actually said this, but someone maybe smart like me, maybe smart like someone else, said something to the effect of, George has a pretty, decent idea about characters, and I think that's what ultimately drives his story, as opposed to like the greater thematic plot elements to it. Like the themes are flowing from the characters. It's not that George has this idea that he wants to bring out in his stories, and he has the characters do those things. It's rather that he has these characters, and then they bring out the themes of the story. I know that seems like maybe a distinction without a difference, but to me, I think that's fundamental. What's going on with George's world. So I tend to find George's world much more compelling, much more of a reflection of things that have happened in recent history. I mean, we've talked, and I know, you've talked specifically about Quentin Martell as a reflection on the Vietnam War, and I've talked about Daenerys and the occupation of Marine as a potential reflection on the Iraq War and the War on Terror, as well as a number of other things, Reconstruction, the American Civil War, and things like that. But I don't know. It's hard for me to say that Tolkien is worse, because he basically he didn't invent the genre of fantasy, but he invented the things that George is basing some of his own series off. I don't know if that makes sense to you guys or not.
I think I do, and I think I was thinking about it, like a Song of Ice and Fire. It's not dystopian, right? Would you describe it that way?
Yeah. No.
Would either of you? I don't think I quite would, even though like it's a terrible place to live and terrible things are happening. But it's not like 1984 or like Brazil, even, where it's just like the whole focus is on, oh my God, what a shitty world. How did things possibly get this way? Like it's much more kind of poetic and bittersweet than that. And the lessons about power are in there, but so often the actual lesson is a shrug. And George is going, that seems complicated. Which, if the drama wasn't so strong, that would exactly. And if the drama wasn't so strong, that would seem kind of weak sauce. You know what I mean? And so I think A Song of Ice and Fire dwells in those questions to sharper and more troubling length than Lord of the Rings, but it's still not a manifesto. I still don't think it has answers.
Yeah, I think for me, and maybe I'm taking a different definition of corruption here, but I think of the two most corrupted individuals in each, in a way, would be Gollum, I think, obviously, and then people analogize him to Theon Greyjoy a lot, or at least the fate of him as Reek to Gollum. Whereas with Gollum, he's corrupted by a magical force, the ring. You see with Theon, his degradation comes at the hands of other humans. And then you start thinking, in Middle Earth, you do see the corruption of Orthanc and Minas Tirith, but that's usually like a Palantir involved, or, whatever's going on in Edoras is, Saruman whispering through Wormtongue, whispering into Theoden's ears. Like there always seems to be a magic or some kind of supernatural element feeding the corruption or causing the corruption. Sometimes it's very literal corruption, like the blade from Minas Morgul. But with George's story, and I'm not saying this is better or worse, because I think they're not necessarily trying to speak to the same thing, but George's are generally definitely the institution or the way this game is played, the systems that are obstructed, the feudal contract and breaking that. It feels like the corruption is more just human in origin, as opposed to the corruption is coming from an all-powerful, seeing evil eye kind of thing, which seems to come true. And I also only have a Peter Jackson understanding of the Lord of the Rings. I'm not the biggest Tolkien nerd out there, so I apologize for that.
You don't have to apologize at all. I mean, I'm trying to go through the books right now, but it's slow going, shall we say, for especially those early parts of Fellowship of the Ring, which
it can be for sure. And I think it's a question of how satisfied you are with the metaphor, right? Like I can say like, oh, the Eye of Sauron, it stands in for greed and ambition and a lack of humanity. And that's all true, but it's like, well, that's convenient, because in the real world, the process of losing humanity doesn't take the form of a giant sorcerer's cloud emerging around you, and then there's a tower. So at some point, you have to address the real to bring the humanity out, but that artifice is always going to be in there. So it's a difficult balance. And I know for a lot of people, most fantasy is just too far on the silly side. Like it's just emotionally unrecognizable for them. And this is part of why. And I think everyone has that line, we're just like, oh, this is silly now. This is all just proper nouns and place names. I no longer care.
Yeah. All good points, everyone here, and everyone in the chat too. Joe the Magician, I can't find the question, but he asked which future Duncan Egg novella are we most looking forward to? So George has said that he has a number of future novellas in mind. He's got one that was titled The She-Wolves of Winterfell, though he doesn't like the title, so it's not going to be titled that. He has another one called The Village Hero, The Sellsword, The Champion, and a couple other ones, which tend to me indicate a couple different storylines that Dunk is going to be involved in. So what do you guys have a one that you're looking forward to the most of Dunk's future adventures?
It's She-Wolves for me. I'm a Stark person. I think the Starks are my favorite. I'm very interested what's going to be like that. Those set of eyes on Winterfell at that time, I think, is just going to be such a fascinating look. So yeah, I just think because I mean we know that there's a lot more to Stark history, but we have the Ned Stark and his legacy version of Stark history, and seeing something just a little bit before that, I'm very curious what it looks like. Especially if like someone like Old Nan shows up in some sort of role or something like that.
Young Nan makes Dunk's eyes go a wandering. Absolutely. But I agree, especially that perspective, an outsider's perspective on Winterfell, perspective of one of the small folk who has never been trained to like be awed of Winterfell or regarded as important. And to just, from what we gather what the plot is supposed to be, to see like real political conniving and backstabbing in the North. And, I do think there is some of that in the books already. The Northerners are already shown jockeying for advantage. But yeah, they often are held up as paragons of honor relative to the scheming lords of the Reach and the Westerlands. So to see in something like She-Wolves, to see those Starks behave like that, I think that would be great.
I think that's a lot of fun. For me, my mind is probably going to be the Sellsword, provided that George ever writes it, which I think is likely going to be Duncan the Small infiltrating the Golden Company and potentially foiling one of Bittersteel's plots to invade Westeros. I think that could be a fun. I mean, I like those kind of. I like espionage stories as told, so I think that could be a fun way that George could explore that genre. I think something that I really like about the Duncan Egg novellas is how each of the first three, at least, explore different genres. You have the first one, which is high fantasy. The second one, which is what would you even call the Sworn Sword? It's like a, I mean, the mystery is obviously a mystery, not novella, but I think each of these stories could have a different genre that George. Oh, it's a Western. The Sworn Sword is a Western.
Sure.
Mystery novel.
Absolutely. With the dry riverbed and the local, the little mercenaries. Yeah, that's very Western. You're right.
Yeah, so we'll see what the different genres that George explores, and I think if George touches my special place in terms of future genres, I would enjoy that quite a lot. Maybe we'll take two more, and then we'll call it a night for a little while here. Maria asks, Emmett, would you do a special episode about the Never-Ending Story, the book? It's so meta.
I've never actually read the Never-Ending Story. I'm a big fan of the movie from childhood, but maybe I should take it up with that recommendation. I shall. Thank you.
Sounds like a good one. Micah has asked a question. He says, I'm trying to find his question right now. There we go. If you were Bloodraven and were going to grant Almighty God King powers to any character that is not already a Warg/Greenseer, who would you pick?
Well, I wouldn't, but if I wouldn't, I wouldn't be Bloodraven, I guess. Like, I wouldn't have that voice in my head that goes, maybe you shouldn't do that.
Just don't.
Just don't.
Don't awaken the old powers.
I don't know. Yeah, who do you think would be okay? Who do you think would handle those okay?
I'm trying to think of a character that's not a Warg or a Greenseer. Davos? Maybe?
I could morally trust him with it, but I don't like what would Davos do with his powers? He would be like, oh, I'm checking in on my sons. They seem fine. Anywho. What's he gonna do? He's gonna go look at some fish. Like same thing. You give working powers to Brienne, and then she she goes and polishes a mirror very quickly or something. That's what Brienne does with superpowers. It's the problem with giving good people superpowers. They're unimaginative.
Everybody's saying Sam in the chat. Samuel Tarly, give him Greenseer powers.
That nerd, he'd just be looking back at history and be like, did you know the details about this event were quite different than how they were recorded? Which is what I would be doing too. So
I was like, are you talking about me or yourself here? Because that would be me if I had Greenseer powers. I'd be like, actually,
and then
be that guy that would come back. Yeah,
be the ultimate reply guy.
I'll just say Grand Maester Pycelle, just because I'm oddly curious what he would look like with God Emperor powers. Like, what does his vision of what would he do with those kind of powers? I just have no idea. Like, I can envision what a bunch of other characters might do, but
He would just gossip.
And he would find out what Tywin Lannister actually thought about him. Like, ooh, what is my?
And the answer is he doesn't.
Yes,
That's what Tywin thinks about Pycelle.
Don Draper in the elevator. I don't think about you at all.
Exactly. Who are you again?
Oh, that's good. So, yep, those are our answers for that. So, well, guys, I think that's going to wrap us up for this analysis of A Clash of Kings, Bran 7, as well as our Knack After Dark. So we appreciate all you folks sticking around. Again, I don't know what the future is going to hold for live streams. I really hope we can do them, but I can't make any promises at this time. We will be back in podcast form in a few months, and it's going to be grand to get back into a Storm of Swords, and I can't wait to do that with you, sir, and with our special guest as well. It's bittersweet leaving you all behind, but I'm happy that we did this with we finished A Clash of Kings, we finished another book in the series, and it was a pleasure having Manu join us for this final episode on A Clash of Kings and on this excellent chapter in Bran 7. So it's a blast. So thank you all so much for listening and watching. And I'll miss you guys a fair amount, a lot, not at all.
And we're gonna miss you too, buddy. But you focus on taking care of yourself and keeping your love and the family alive and strong. And we will be here to celebrate you when you are back among us.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. The common people are sewing banners to your name awaiting your return. So
that's exactly right. Jeff is Viserys now.
Oh, great. Great.
I guess more John Connington, really.
I don't even have red hair. I think I'd probably be more Viserys than Jay Khan. That's funny. That's that's awesome.
So many exiles to choose from. No,
there are
love
so
you,
many.
buddy. You know it.
Yeah. So, bye for now. We'll see you soon.